Are we ready?
Yeah.
What are those two for?
The coaches.
Coaches aren't here. All right, let's go. If we might, may we call the meeting to order, and may I ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let's see, first up on our agenda, we have some special recognition for one of our phenomenal sports teams. The recognition for the Fairfield Ludlow High School cheerleaders as FCAC champions, SEAC LL championships, and Marine Corps Connecticut 2013 Team of the Year. Wow. Ladies, come on in. Sure. We can ask you to come on in. See a lot of familiar faces and names here. This time, thank you for clarifying. We wanted to take a moment to give these young women some special recognition on behalf of the work they've done. One of the things I've learned over time, being involved in some of the youth sports in town, is how hard cheerleaders work. In many cases year-round, certainly in great shape and condition, and sometimes much better condition and shape than some of the football players that also share the field with them. I've also seen that in some of their year-round competition, the tremendous amount of discipline, tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of effort that goes into doing that, and how much of it's team-based. Because unlike football, unlike baseball, unlike basketball, where one player can do something and make up for some other teams, the coordination and choreography between all the players in this sport needs to be perfect because they're judged on how the whole team does. So truly, one player isn't enough. It takes every member of the team doing their part and doing that. So again, congratulations on what you've done, and we have some special certificates here for you. First up, Hillary Pacelli. Is Hillary here? No? All right.
She's on her way.
She's on her way, all right. Colleen Keith. Okay. We must have all the, Taylor Van Fleet. If this was a lottery, you guys would be in tough shape. Allie Nick. And I know her parents, I'm going to talk to her about that.
One of them's right here.
Okay, who's, Kristen, you're here instead of your daughter?
I am here.
All right, special parent recognition. Kristen, come on up. All right, standing in for your daughter, congratulations. All right.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Oh, she's here. Oh, good. Great.
Oh, here she is.
I'm not sure which one she is.
Your mom was subbing in. Come on, come on.
Is that Allie?
Allie, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You have Allie Nick? Right there. That's it, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Al.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right,
Hillary.
Hillary. Do we have Hillary there?
We do. Nope, here's the first one right away.
All right, Hillary Pacelli. All right,
Congratulations.
Hillary, congratulations. Great work.
Congratulations, Hillary.
All right, next up, Mary Kate O'Brien.
Big group.
Kendall Terrell. Wow. Allie Meyer. Mayor. Nope. Allie Franchuk. Allie, congratulations.
Thank you.
There you go.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats, Allie.
All right. I'm not going to get this one right. Patrice? How do I say the last name?
Simonides.
I would have never gotten that one right. Katie Grant.
Yeah.
All right, Katie, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Katie.
There you go.
Congrats,
Thank you.
Katie.
All right. Nina Martucci. All right, Nina.
All right.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Nina.
All right. Haley Diorio. Okay. Morgan Galdanzi.
Caldenzi.
Galganzi. All right, Morgan, congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Morgan.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Morgan.
All right, Zoe Adino. Congratulations.
Thank you.
There you go.
Congratulations, Zoe.
Congratulations, Zoe.
All right, Abby Casey.
All right, yeah.
Congratulations. There you go.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations,
job.
Abby.
All right, Tess Atkins. Tess isn't here. Amanda O'Brien. Not here. Sage Moriarty. Sage, congratulations.
Congratulations, Sage.
Congratulations, Sage.
All right. Lindsay and Imo. Oh, Lindsay, there you are.
Beautiful.
Congratulations.
Great.
All right.
Congratulations, Lindsay.
Congratulations.
All right. The Katie Kirchgasser. Katie. Congratulations. There you go.
Congratulations, Katie.
Congratulations, Katie.
Uh-oh. I got another one here. And Kiki? Kiki, tell me how it's... Von Brochet. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Katie.
All right.
Great job.
All right. And again, just lastly, thank you for how you've represented our town and the excellence that you've achieved and the example you've set for other students throughout the school. Would you guys care to say anything?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just thank you very much.
Yeah, me too. We're very proud of you. Very proud of you.
Let's see, is Dave or Greg, did you guys want the other certificates?
Sure. Give them to Craig.
Yeah.
You're
All right.
welcome.
Ladies,
Great
thank
job.
you again.
Congratulations, ladies.
You're welcome to stay for the whole meeting if you find it that exciting. All right. Mr. Mayor has a scheduling conflict that he needs to leave early on. We wanted to do a brief review of the waterfall chart for an item later in the presentation in our program here. So it's not, the waterfall chart and our capital plan in and of itself is not an item on the agenda, but we wanted to have Bob give us a brief overview of that so we can see where the Ludlow project fits. So Bob, if you could come up to the podium and just step us through that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Very briefly, the waterfall chart was distributed with the package that went out for this meeting. The waterfall chart is important to the town because it is it's the planning and it goes into the chart and the resulting calculations that develop our debt flow, our debt service cash flow numbers that go into our budget. These particular projects were projected to occur. They are included in the waterfall chart, but not right now for 100% of them. The window portion, which is approximately $3 million, and the additions and renovation portion, which is approximately $6 million, were both included in the waterfall chart to be capital projects to be funding for which would be authorized in the fiscal year 2013-2014, our next fiscal year. The windows was scheduled to be completed during that fiscal year. The renovation addition portion, the $6 million, that was in the design phase for 13-14 for the expenditure of about $250,000, with the remaining $5,750,000 work to be primarily completed in fiscal year 15. The roofs were scheduled to be completed one half, authorized in 15-16, and 1/2 authorized in 16-17. So that's 1/2 of the 3,600,330 authorized in 15-16. That's 1,815,000.
You're going through those numbers pretty fast.
I'm sorry?
3 million for windows, 6 million for renovation.
Okay,
Are the roofs
we-
included in those numbers, or are they additional?
The roof is additional.
Okay, could you,
Okay, that's what I was just getting to. So I'm going to back up a little bit. The windows is in the chart to be authorized and expended in the fiscal year coming up. Fiscal year July 1, 13 through June 30, 14. The additions and renovations is scheduled in the chart to be authorized in 213, 214 fiscal year, but the design phase only to be completed in 13-14, with the bulk of the expenditures, $5,500,000 to be completed in fiscal year 15. 1/2 of the roofs, or $1,815,000, is in the chart to be authorized and work performed in 15-16, and in the other half, the other $1,815,000, to be authorized and work performed in 16-17. So if the board chooses to, now what's also included in the chart is removal and bathroom renovations for another $1 million. That item is not included in the request that is currently before the board. So, in summary, what is before the board, what is $11.5 million approximately, is about $1 million less than the total requisition prior, or that's in the capital chart. But doing it all now would require borrowing a year or two earlier and would accelerate our cash flow requirement for our debt service payments. As of right now, we'd anticipate borrowing for the given the capital of the water flow, we'd anticipate borrowing for the addition and renovation, that's $6 million. We'd anticipate borrowing that in 15. This would accelerate that $6 million to be borrowed in 14. The roofs, which would be borrowed in 16, fiscal years 16 and 17, if we do that now also, that would accelerate that into the year 14. So it would basically accelerate the borrowing for about a year or 2 years, depending on which item you're speaking about. So it would increase the budget requirement for debt service
In the short term.
in the short term, but not in the long term.
go ahead.
Clarifying question about the bathrooms. So the 1 million, and forgive me if I'm,
$1,125,000 was the initial school estimate for the bathroom renovation.
okay, so we're not looking at the bathroom renovation.
That is in neither Scheme 1 nor Scheme 2. That is not incorporated in the
Even though it's
current.
discussed in the report, all right. Just confirming that.
Do I have that right, Dr. Pat?
You're right.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Sure. And I'm happy to put a little template spreadsheet together and flip it to you tomorrow, but I just kind of wanted to see if we could just look at these, what you just went through and what we just wrote down, if we could just look at them individually and in total, originally by year, and when we think the debt was going to drop to what year. I know it gets to the same number 20 years out. And then kind of compare that to what this currently reads and just see where the short-term variances are.
You want it fully factored into the schedule.
Well, without redoing the schedule, or just take it offline and look at A and B.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's going to be the same after 3 or 4 years,
yeah.
or 5 years, whatever.
If I can kind of piggyback on that, I guess what I'd look for is what the impact is on the annual debt service for the next
4 or 5 years in terms of what's accelerated and what isn't,
Right.
so we can see what the, if you will, the budget impact is.
Yep, that's
Do
fine.
that. Is that a fair way of?
That's a better way of saying it, yep.
I think you're both saying the same thing.
Yep.
Another follow-up.
Go ahead.
And this may not be a question for Mr. Mayor. Where does that 1.125 million for the bathrooms reside currently?
Well, there's no authorization request for that. So
But
it
in the
resides
waterfall.
in the minds of the Dr. Titles of the world.
Where in the waterfall?
Sal Morbidos. Oh,
Where in
where
the
in the
waterfall?
waterfall? That is part of the, actually,
I can't read some, it's too dark.
Mr. Cullen may be able to help you. I see him back there smiling.
oh, hi, Tom. I'm not sure. Actually, the 1.15 is in the 6 million. I'm sorry.
It's in the renovation
So,
and addition number.
Okay.
so it's the renovated addition number,
Okay, so,
Oh, it is, oh, okay.
right. That's why the borrowing is, what is 11,500,000 instead of, 11,400,000 instead of 12,500,000, because the bathroom renovations have been taken out of that renovation piece.
Or, again, let me rephrase that. Mr. Mayor went through a $3 million number for windows, a $6 million for reservation, for a total of $9 million, then had two parts of the roof, 1.8 and 1.8. If you total those all up, that's 12.6. The resolution
Correct.
before us is 11.5, so that, or 11.6. So that $1 million difference for the bathrooms is what is not in the resolution.
Correct.
But is in the schedule as before us. Correct.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Cullen.
So we borrow a little bit less sooner. But I'm
Any
sure
further-
the bathrooms will be before you at some point.
Any further questions on the waterfall chart?
No, you're good.
And again, the waterfall chart is our name for kind of our capital plan that lays out both the projects going through year by year and takes it all the way through to the building, when the funds will be needed, and when we'll be bonding for those funds, so that it kind of manages our cash flow and ties back into our annual budget projections, as well as our debt service projections in the years ahead.
The question I would have is, with respect to the bathroom renovations, if that's expected to be taken off the table, or if it's expected to be asked for at a future time, because I'm sure you'd want that in the revised debt service schedule that you've requested. So if I could be provided that information, then it would be all-inclusive.
Thank you. Just as long as we took this a little bit out of sequence, and since the Board of Ed folks are here, anything you would like to add to just the cash flow description of that? All right. Any further comments from the board? All right, Mr. Mayor, I know you have another appointment. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
taking us through that. All right, now, back to the agenda. Next item up is to consider and act upon the minutes of a whole series of meetings. February 9th, March 5th, March 11th, March 13th, March 19th, April 1st, April 3rd, and April 10th. May I have a motion to consider?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Tetro, I would ask if the board would be amenable to holding these minutes over until our next meeting. There's just so many of them, and I had just not had a chance to go through every page and review them, and there are some, joint meetings with the Board of Finance, and I'm not sure if they have accepted those minutes that we were present for, so I'm not quite sure how to handle those, so.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
And so the motion before us is to postpone the approval of the minutes to the date certain, being the next Board of Selectmen meeting.
Which is May 15th. Yes.
Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kyler.
Thank you.
Next up, for information only, we have some resignations from the Conservation Commission. Letitia Ferguson, Democrat, 542 Mount Laurel Road. From the Greater Bridgeport Transit District, Sam Kudis from 2979 Burr Street, and from the Harbor Management Commission, Sandy Mann from 200 Reef Road. Next up, a banner request. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from Coleman, Connecticut Race for the Cure to hang a banner on Sherman Green. Let's see if we have. Thank you.
Thank you for seeing me today. My name is Donna
Okay,
DiCarlo.
Yep, if you would wait just a moment,
I
please.
absolutely will wait just a moment.
Do we have some background for this, Jen? Is there some backup for this? Am I missing that in my
There is
packet?
backup in here, there's a banner questionnaire,
I have
Oh.
two copies.
Okay,
and
I've
that
seen them.
helps, oh, and on the back's the banner policy.
All right, I'm sorry, I seem to be missing that.
If you don't have it, I can make a copy.
No, I think that's okay.
No, that's fine. I have an extra one I brought from.
All right.
Oh, okay, thanks.
You can have that one.
Good, thank you. We okay?
I have it, yeah.
All right, sorry, I just, thank you
No,
very
that's
much
quite all right.
for waiting for a moment. If you could please introduce yourself and.
My
tell us-
name is Donna DiCarlo. I'm a
Okay.
resident of Fairfield, and I am also a volunteer for Komen, Connecticut, which is the Connecticut affiliate of Susan G. Komen for the Cure. What the organization is doing is bringing to Fairfield County for the first time a race located in Westport, May 11th. We were hoping to get the support of Fairfield to gather the towns in the area to come and support that event. We were hoping to have a banner up next week if that is available to us. We do have several chairs that are residents, and we are pulling several volunteers as well as participants for the race as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board?
Just a clarification, and thank you, Donna, for being here. The questionnaire form says the event's not held in Fairfield, the event is actually in Westport.
Correct, at Sherwood Island.
Okay, so just to clarify that for the board.
We currently have 800 participants already registered. And the Hartford event they've been doing for 20 years draws in 20,000 participants at this point.
Wow,
And all the monies raised, I should say, does stay in Connecticut.
okay. And just, unless,
No,
any other
no, I'm
questions?
good.
All right, Kristen, are you okay if I, or do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
So can I ask, you said Connecticut, or it says, is your organization based out of the town of Fairfield?
No. It's out of Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
I'm in Fairfield. Was there some mistake on that?
No,
When it was-
it's a question of how you read it. I think you answered it correctly,
Okay.
because it says out of the town as opposed based in the town.
Okay.
And Jen, perhaps we can revise the questionnaire so
Yeah.
that it's clear on that. No, you answered it correctly.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we asked it poorly, but you answered it correctly.
Happens.
And it says, is your event to be held in the town of Fairfield? That's a no also, right?
Correct.
And is your organization a nonprofit, and that's a yes?
Correct.
Um, And there are participants from Fairfield. All right, thank you. I think before the board, this is kind of one of the questions that we kind of wrestled with when we're coming up on the guidelines,
Mhm.
in terms of when we look at kind of the banner, Sherman Green, the focus was to encourage people to come to downtown to promote Fairfield businesses and promote our nonprofit work along with that. Certainly a great cause, and certainly, but I think part of the issue then becomes, is what is the purpose of the banners, and when we look at what space is available, there are some other organizations that are also kind of in line at certain points for these that may meet our guidelines. So I think that's one of the questions before the board in terms of how do we do this? I mean, this is what we've wrestled, it's not,
Oh, no,
it's not
it's-
about your, it's.
I
it's
understand
kind of
that.
us trying to
Absolutely.
wrestle with
You're not the only town that's been wrestling with it,
what
and it's our
goal
first
is.
year, so.
Yeah. in
I just
terms of
appreciate
doing
your
that.
taking the consideration.
I have a couple general thoughts.
Sure.
One is specific to the Race for the Cure, which I think is a unique event in that it tends to be a regional event, and it's one that is often not town-specific, and having participated in other places in the country. So I think that that's something unique for this organization. Generally speaking, to the whole banner conversation, I actually have been thinking about this over the past few meetings, and though forgive me, it's not necessarily germane to this vote, I believe in the past that this was the first selectman's office who made the decision about whether or not banners were placed, and at some point, the Board of Selectmen chose to create a policy and then vote when there was a question or an appeal, so to speak. Am I right in that?
I don't know about the whole history. I think that from when in the last 2 years, we started having these things come before us. We needed some criteria for making a decision. So the board kind of developed these criteria as a start to help the board kind of evaluate proposals, and the idea that if they met the criteria, then it wouldn't have to come before the Board of Selectmen. It could be authorized administratively by the first selectman's office. If it doesn't meet these criteria, then the exception process was that it comes before the Board of Selectmen so we can evaluate whether that's the case. There have been situations in the past where it's been a Fairfield organization, specifically the Fairfield Theater Company, holding an event at the Klein because we want to support the theater company. The board decided we should go ahead and authorize that, at least as a one-off, maybe not as a policy, but as a one-off event. There have been other cases, I think the Chowderfest in Westport, that was supported by Fairfield residents and Fairfield businesses. We did that. There was the Fairfield Children's Choir that had, Fairfield County Children's Choir, that had a large number of participants from Fairfield. I think the event, again, was at the Klein or something like that, where we went ahead and made exceptions in those cases.
Right.
So that we've tried to be supportive of the community. I think if you read the guidelines, the overall guideline is to continue to promote downtown businesses and events, restaurants, and kind of to drive business to downtown. And I think if you read through the guidelines, that is clearly the intent of what we're trying to do. That doesn't make it right or wrong, that just makes it that the intent that what we try to do. Does that help?
It does, and actually, so two pieces of that. One specific to this event. I think we have made exceptions for events where there are a number of Fairfield residents participating in nonprofit activities or cultural events that are part of what our residents are doing. I think this is an event that is similar to that. And then back to the general piece, I wonder if you would be willing, if we could have a conversation perhaps at another meeting with respect to that, because I think you raise an important point in terms of timing and logistics of who's available for what and prioritizing. And because we meet twice a month and recognizing that we have some general criteria, I'm leaning more towards asking that we have a conversation about asking the First Selectman's office to completely take this over, even in the case of the exceptions. And again, it's not germane to now, and perhaps we can talk about it later, but if there's someone who's calling who is a Fairfield agency with an event in Fairfield that's going to be happening downtown, that there be an easier, more efficient mechanism for that. So it's just something to consider, and I put that out before you now. But I tend to, based on the other exceptions that we have made, and that I think this is an event similar to that in terms of offering an opportunity that a large number of, I imagine, I guess it's your first time, so we don't know for sure. I do know I've seen signs up around, and I anticipate that there will be a number of Fairfielders who can't participate here who will go there, so.
Mr. Kiley, any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things. This is a great cause, and thank you very much. And, it will benefit people within the state and within Fairfield. But any person coming before us for any event is going to have somebody from Fairfield as part of that event. So that can't be the only criteria. So maybe the compromise position could be, I don't know how many spots are available, but maybe we could designate one spot for regional events. I'm not sure if there's 6 or 8 spots. I'm really not clear on that. And the goal needs to be, as Mr. Tetro said, to use the green to drive people to our businesses downtown and to promote Fairfield. However, there are these great regional events that benefit all kinds of people from all over the state, including our town, and we want to help them as well. So maybe we could have a policy, or it's more of a policy directive or a change, that maybe one spot could be designated as kind of a rotating regional short-term for a couple of 3 weeks, because this is a short-term request as well.
We
based
only
on
need
the-
it for next week,
Just,
actually.
right. And so that we could accommodate those types of requests without going beyond that, and always having one spot available for something that's either national, regional, state level, or whatever, and then make sure that we are, say, stricter on the other spots that are more germane to Fairfield itself, because this is a great cause, and I'd like to help you out. You know? So I would be inclined to say, in the short term, please do this, but maybe look at the policy again, as you were suggesting, for maybe some modifications or pushing it back upstairs.
And just to clarify, each banner is only placed for 2 weeks max.
Max,
So
right.
it's 1 week certainly fits within that guideline.
Right.
And the challenge when we have 2 different input streams, if
Right.
Kevin and, from a system standpoint, is that potentially we could approve something at a Board of Selectmen meeting as an exception, and to have something that meets the criteria come in the next week and not have the space available because of that.
Right. Yep, that's fair.
Again, so perhaps that's just a way of saying maybe we reconsider this down the road in terms
Yeah.
of creating a single stream or single input so that there's some way of balancing that out.
I think that's fair.
I think you raise a good point in terms of, is there some way of segmenting some of this? My larger concern is if we're going to be effective, we don't want to make this like a classified ad kind of page where everything gets lost in the minutia. At some point, to the extent that we can be effective as a promotional tool in doing that.
Agreed.
But back to the
Item.
item before us. Thank you for being patient, letting us deal with a larger issue here. Any further comment on this specific resolution?
No.
No?
All right. Anyone from the public wish to comment on the item before us? Seeing none, back to the board. Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Actually, if you
What?
could move in second, please.
Oh.
Oh, could somebody move this, please?
Oh, so moved.
Second?
Second.
All right.
Thanks, Jen.
Now, thank you, Jen. We're ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck.
And Jen, please note in there that on a future minutes or future item agenda, we'd like to have a discussion of and review of our banner policy.
Thank you.
We did resignations, we did banner, request for use of town green. So here, consider and act upon a request for Mama's Markets LLC for the use of Town Hall Green to hold their new American Market on Saturday, June 15th, from 10 to 4:30 p.m. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. Is there anyone here from that organization? All right, seeing none. Is there an item in our packet on this, Jen?
Yes,
Wow.
Yes and nine.
right here.
That's just one pager.
Sorry, guys.
all
For
right.
some reason,
I've already read it.
I'm not sure I brought everything down from my office. I apologize. Yeah, that's what I read before. All right. Any comments from the board? If not, all right, go ahead.
I'll comment. I do think that it sounds like a very intriguing group, but it's a for-profit group, and despite the fact that they will be donating some of the profits to a nonprofit in New Haven, I think that that's one pretty clear line that it's a good idea for us to stay on one side of, which is supporting the nonprofits who we currently support and perhaps other nonprofits who might come. But that's my thought about this request.
Okay, Mr. Kylie?
Well, with what I've read and what I know, and without any presentation to convince me otherwise, I tend to agree with you. That it sounds like it might be on the other side of the line for an easy approval.
All right, I guess I would kind of add on to both those thoughts in the sense that, one, for me, there's a big difference between a banner, as we just discussed, and this. This has an impact on the neighborhood. This has an impact on our green in terms of the amount of use which increases our maintenance. We are not, by any means, trying to fill up every weekend, all summer, with items or events for our green. I think one can make the argument that we actually have enough of a traffic impact and enough of a neighborhood impact with what we're currently doing. So that I, for one, am certainly not looking for other events to fill out the green or to, in essence, tax our neighborhood and our residents from that standpoint. Agreeing with both your points, because it's a profit. It company, organization. It seems to fall outside our norm and our regs, and also our intent. We're not here to promote businesses per se. We're here to promote
Right.
causes that help our residents, help the town. I just don't see this as something that falls within that criteria and something that we should support on this end.
Right. And that's a great point about the neighborhood and the traffic. I mean, this is a neighborhood that has, a lot of activity from the town hall and the churches and the upcoming parade and, last weekend's events at the beach and all that stuff. So any relief we can provide them is, I'm sure, well received. So that's good.
Any further comments from the board? Any comments from the public? All right, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Oh, no.
All right. All opposed?
Opposed.
All right, thank you.
In favor of the opposition.
Next up, to hear, consider, and act upon a resolution appropriating $11,630,700 for the costs associated with a window and roof replacement, alterations, and additions at Fairfield Ludlow High School, and authorizing issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. May I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All right. Dr. Title, do we have a presentation of sorts to step us through this?
Bill Silver can probably as well. Yeah, I think we can give you a brief overview, and then we have some resource people here to answer questions as well. Thanks for having this on the agenda. This project, as you heard from Mr. Mayor, really has three components, and it was one of those projects that when we talked at the Capital Projects Summit was, is this something where the board should come forward and consolidate different pieces and bring it together as a whole, so we don't have to keep coming back? Or is it a project that should be best done in pieces so that the cash flow could be managed differently? So the Board of Education considered the really four elements on the capital projects list for Ludlow. The windows with the accompanying PCB remediation that goes with it, the expansion project, and the roof replacement. They also considered the bathroom renovation. And at the end of the day, the board approved the 3 out of the 4 that are before you. There's no decision made at that point about when and if the the bathrooms would come back. I think that would be off in the distant future at this point. I don't think that's really on the agenda. This is also a project that we talked at the Capital Project Summit a bit, or certainly at the Board of Finance, about sort of a new approach to funding projects. There's no building committee for this project as of the moment. This is in some ways similar to the Osborne Hill. We're trying to follow the state procedures correctly so that projects are handled within the budget and we follow all the guidelines for our reimbursement and we don't require special legislation. So Board of Education hired Bill Silver, here, who you remember from the Osborne Hill project, to do the professional cost estimates, the investigation for this prior to a building committee being formed. And that the process would be that once the town authorized the project, at that point, then we would ask for a building committee to be, up and running on this, rather than have a building committee do all this work and come back to you and have that situation. So this is sort of the new way, I guess, as I described it. So, the windows have been around for quite a while. It's not an old one, but that's bounced around. The history of that, it goes back to at least 2009. Bounced around between the TFC, the Board of Ed, back and forth. And what kind of put that over the top was the PCB findings there. So that really, makes that, critical, because we need to remediate the PCBs in the windows, and this will accomplish that, and we'll also get the windows, and Bill can describe in detail that project. And actually, the window project came in pretty close to the budget as we've been carrying it all along. The other part of the expansion, the enrollment of the school has been growing. In the ed specs, you saw a chart of an updated enrollment. This school is going to be over 1,800 students in the near future. There's no guesswork with that. These kids are in our system right now. The school is designed for 1,400. Even with its expansion, we're estimating the capacity to be 1,525, so we're not really going way over the top. Or if enrollment in several years drops down to 1,700 or 1,600, we're still not overbuilding. And we have people who can speak to the overcrowding there. We're particularly acute in the science area. Patrice, our science expert, is here if you want to know more about that, and Greg Hatzis can talk to that as well in terms of the overcrowding, and that's an issue that's right upon us. The roof originally, as you heard Mr. Mayor say, was out a year or two. Unfortunately, in January, when part of that roof blew off, and 16 classrooms were put out of commission, and that's the roof of the age that this roof is we're trying to replace, the board at that point decided that it's best we try to accelerate that project. That was incredibly disruptive, potentially very costly. You know, we worked together on getting the insurance claim for that, but still, you know, that's not how you want to find out that you have a roof problem. So that's why there was some acceleration of that roof project back to, you know, sooner rather than later because of the experience we had with that roof, that section of the roof. So that's kind of where we are procedurally, give you sort of the broad view. I have Bill just talk through maybe a little bit of each of these plans. I should say this is a different way of doing ed specs as well. The ed specs as written are very different from ed specs that we've done before. So we aren't writing ed specs for what a high school should be. This is an ed spec very specific to this project. So a building committee has got a very specific charge. And I think you can address the charge if you would do the project. But it actually says in here, there are certain elements of this that we're not doing. So please don't do these, building committee. They're not funded. So we're really trying to narrow the window of what, if it's approved, what the scope of the work is. It's this study that Bill put together, and there's certain things that are not in here, and they're clearly stated in here. And that's different from the way ed specs have been done in the past. We're hoping that will also help keep the costs and the scope of the project within the intentions. Whereas previously, ed specs were written generically for, here's what we want in a, you know, elementary school, here's what we want in a middle school. And then there was a funding attached to it. Then a building committee went off and did whatever. I said, this is a different animal. This is very narrow. So this building committee is not to go out there and do the bathrooms, even though they might want to. There's no money for bathrooms, and they're clearly excluded. Right? So that's a little difference in the process.
Thank you.
That helps.
Do you have any-
Go ahead.
Related to the ed specs, I realized this afternoon I did not have a copy in the packet. Do you have copies of those, and what was the date of approval?
They were approved February 26th.
Okay. Do you happen to have a copy with you?
I have mine, which I'll give you if no one else has an extra.
Can we get
Right, here. I'll
pass
borrow.
those to?
Were they distributed?
I don't think we've gotten those.
I thought that Kathy, we gave her the ed specs and this, right? I see you have the architect study.
Yeah, have that.
Right.
They
The
weren't
ed
in
specs
our
mirror
packets.
that,
Okay.
but we brought them over. Maybe they just didn't make their way to you. But they are really different, shorter, compact. So I guess you'll get copies?
Yes.
Right. But I think if you read the study and saw the scope in the study, the ed specs conform to that, basically. And those are relatively recent because we couldn't complete the ed specs. The board had to decide what elements needed to go in the ed specs. So when they decided bathrooms were not part of this, we then removed those from the ed specs and put them down in the do not do part of the project. So we're trying to get parallel between here's the study, here's the cost, here's the ed specs, so that there's no misconception on a building committee about what they're expected to do. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So maybe I have Bill give an overview of the three parts of the,
Could we
I
talk
don't know,
about
what works for you? I mean, if you just want to ask
Sure.
questions, then
Well,
we can just do Q&A. I
I
mean,
think-
we're game, so.
Okay, why don't we take it one step at a time?
Yep.
You've described kind of a new process here, which
Yep.
I think we all find very intriguing.
Yeah.
Mr. Conlon, I think you had some questions on
Yes,
the
I
process.
do, yes, and thanks for being here. Specific to the process.
Yes.
For now. And so it's new to us. We've never done it this way before with a lot of building committees, so it's uncharted territory, and that's fine. My question is, and I think you can answer this, but we've talked a lot about, over the years, at the Board of Finance especially, about, how we do projects and how we put numbers out there, right? And we've always had this conversation about the cart in front of the horse. We're approving $13.3 million for something, therefore the world knows it. We have approved and we are willing to spend $13.3 million for something, whether it's the right price, high, low, or what, right? So has there been any thought, this might be a question for the administration, as to, in addition to this new how you're going to do and what you're going to do process, has there been any thought into how we would also try to do it without showing our hand financially to the construction world so that we have more leverage or possibly get better pricing?
Yep. Let me give a 30-second answer, and then I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Tittle. We had a committee set up with representatives from the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, RTM, Board of Ed, Superintendent's Office, and the TFC to review our building process. That's what a number of things have come out of that. One, we changed when we handle non-recurring, in terms of we moved it away from the budget process.
Right.
Second, and it was distributed out to this board, and we can do it again, we came up with the steps involved when specifically we're going for a school project that is, we're looking for reimbursement dollars from the state. And the key is the reimbursement.
Right.
There's a different process for reimbursement versus a project that we're not going to go for reimbursement dollars on. And the quickest example that comes to mind is Penfield Pavilion, where we actually, in that case, went out to bid first and then came back and got the resolution with bids in place. I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Tittle in a minute, but when that committee reviewed what we did with Dr. Tittle and Mr. Cullen's help, they laid out the steps involved in a school reimbursement project, and the state requires certain things to be in place. One of those is a resolution with approved funding. And Jen, if you'll make a note, we can get that, we want to distribute that back out to the board so we have that in place. That was a while back when we got that out.
Yeah.
But Dr. Tittle, with that as a lead-in, I'm going to turn it back to you.
That's 90% of the answer. The requirements for state reimbursement are that we must have a resolution for 100% of the estimated costs. And in order for us to file the first form, we have to have a professional cost estimate. So there's really no way around that, again, short of special legislation and so on and so forth. But the normal process is you have to go out there with an estimate. I do think Bill has something to add on this, on the contractor's perspectives of this and bidding and the
Right.
notion that if we play our hand, that somehow we don't get as good a
That's right.
pricing. I mean, if you look at just one example in the recent past, the Ward Roof Project, there was a resolution passed through all the town bodies for that project to be about $11 million. That project got bid as a base bid somewhere between 6 and 7. So the contractor certainly didn't look at that and say, oh my God, they've authorized $11 million, my bid's going to be $10,999,000. But maybe Bill could talk to that, because I don't think it necessarily hurts us, but this is the process that we have to follow with the state for school reimbursable projects.
Yeah, and if I might, on the reverse side of that, we had the project renovations at Sherman School go out to bid. We had a cap on that of about $2 million or thereabouts, and the project came back in at like $5 million. So the contractors obviously didn't listen to us in terms of what we were asking them to do.
And contractors are like architects, is that we do truly estimate our projects or our fees or our construction costs from the bottom up. We truly look at what quantities and materials and labor are involved. Rarely do we ever look at what our budgeted numbers. Yes, we'll use them as a guide, but they don't drive us, because we know there are 10 other bidders that are out there doing it from the bottom up and not relying on a town's estimate for the basis of their contract and the success of their firm for the next 2 years. There's only one town in the state that we know of, Wallingford, that the leadership refuses to release any numbers to the outside world. It mums the building committee, disallowing them from discussing any dollars in their public sessions altogether. In that case, what that does, it stalls their process with the Bureau of School Facilities, because they can't apply their projects up to the BSF because they can't get the bonding resolutions or the funding authorizations as part of that application process. So in that case, Wallingford actually waits until the projects are designed and bid and almost awarded before they bond their project, and only then do they file it with the BSF, which delays their funding for a full year until the legislature will approve based on that application. So it hurts the town in the long run by doing it because of the delay in the funding process. All 164 other towns, they all do it the conventional way, which you are considering.
Right, but on that point,
Yes.
and your statement is it hurts the town, I can think of the obvious hurt being they're going to get whatever they're getting back from the state at a later date.
A year later, correct.
That I understand. But other than that, what evidence is there that it actually hurts them? Are they getting better or worse pricing, or do we know or do we not know that they're really financially impacted by doing it that way?
Confidence is 100%. They are not being financially impacted by releasing budgetary numbers at this early stage, or at any early stage in a project. Not at all. There's too much competition out there to rely on rough budgets or estimates, which include soft costs, contingencies, so many other numbers that go into this $11.3 million. Contractors do not, we architects don't trust it when we develop our fees. We do it from the bottom up. How long it takes, time and material for contractors, and they rely on all their subs.
Right. So let me ask it a different way. Does the town of Wallingford in this case, do they believe that they have saved money by doing it their way?
The leadership does, the building committee does not.
The building committee does not. Okay.
Right.
No, and that's a fair answer. I've just never had that conversation before with anyone that knew about it. And not to argue against myself, but the other question that came to mind is, back to what Dr. Title was saying before, if this truly is a change in process that is going to better direct the building committee, for lack of a better word, of you're going to do A, B, C, and D, and you're not going to do, E, F, and G, right?
Right.
Therefore, they should have better information from which to work from, and there shouldn't be any of the horse trading that happens sometimes during the course of a building committee discussion over 3 months or 6 months before they come to us with a number that's got some moving pieces to it. So is there any rationale that having this type of process in place benefits us from getting better pricing, because everyone knows exactly what they're going to build? There's no mushiness to it. You're going to do these things, and you're not going to do these things.
I think what it does
Does that
is
make sense?
Well, it contains the scope. That's the biggest thing.
Right.
You're really narrowing the scope of the project so that building committee can't go out there with their architect that they hire and consultants and say, we want to go out and price out D, E, and F because we think it might be a good thing to do.
Or it might fit in later on.
Or it might fit in later
Yeah,
on.
exactly.
So in that regard, it does. Still, at the end of the day, you have to file plans for the scope of the project,
Right.
and those are in the bid documents, and people will bid to whatever the scope is. I think it's more of a savings on the front end of not having a building committee go for a year thinking about all the different possibilities that they could possibly do to meet the ed specs, and then having numbers come in that are way too high, and then having to do the horse trading and back and forth.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that this is a perfect process, and that the numbers before you, when we actually take them and do them in more detail than Bill did, couldn't shift around, but at least it won't be because of scope problems.
Right.
That's the biggest problem, is scope creep.
Yeah.
And this really, I think,
Limits that.
limits that.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. I think this really does limit the scope creep, and it puts everyone on a much more narrowly focused path of what we're doing here. So I think that's great. And you've answered my questions about the state, and thank you.
I think that when I'm sorry, did you?
Do you mind if I
Go
follow
right
on
ahead.
to that?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Just, I guess, to reframe it or phrase it another way, besides limiting scope creep, which kind of puts it more towards the building committee side, I think it also more clearly communicates from the Board of Ed. So it's a more specific and clear communication about what the Board of Education desires, and I think that's a win.
Right.
And so I appreciate that effort. Kevin, or Selectman Kylie, alluded to this in his question, and you somewhat answered it, but in terms of these numbers shifting, I think that was part of my question from a process standpoint. If today we move forward with this bond appropriation, and then we go forward and find out, okay, the scope here, this is what we're looking at trying to accomplish, but we clearly can't do that without $12.8 million. Is the process, you'll
happens.
come back, and then
Right.
we'll be adding, I mean, we
Yeah.
theoretically would be, I guess.
Well, I
that-
think there's one of two.
Just to clarify that.
Yeah, there's one of two things. I think that,
Or saying no.
yeah, that building committee either has to come back and say, we have done the scope exactly as designed, and our estimates are $300,000 too high, we need to amend that. And small amendments like that do not need to go back to the full state approval process. One of the important things here is that there's also a June 30th deadline in terms of getting this onto the priority list to get it to the legislature for next, the next session. Once you do that, if you amend it by a relatively small amount of money, you don't have to wait a whole year and have that happen. That can be done administratively by the BSF because we followed all the rules. The other option would be, obviously, for, at that point, they'd have to make a decision about, there's certain elements in these specs that we can't meet, and here's what we're going to have to cut back. So that would be option B, would be,
Right.
we followed it, we didn't, right? So that's really the two choices, and I think that's something that could be written into the charge, Here's your choices. First choice is, do this with the appropriation. Now, one of the advantages of having this bundle, by the way, in terms of this is, there's three distinct elements of this project, and if they go forward simultaneously and they're bid, it could be that, if the roof is a little more, but the expansion's a little less, you can have that flexibility within a single appropriation the way you have it. If these went as three standalones, each project would be subject to a variation. For example, when we did the 5 roof restoration projects, it was one bond for $725,000, a number that will stick with me for the rest of my life. And some of those projects came in slightly under and some came in slightly over, but in total, they were all came in around 700 total. As opposed to 5 different roof restoration projects, where if one of them was a little over, they have to come through all the town bodies to get it. So I think it's always helpful to have that flexibility of having the package, because you can trade dollars if one bid comes in high, one bid comes in low, whereas 3 separate ones done over time, you can get stuck.
Again, process timing question, which I know we've had this conversation many times before with all the different projects,
Right.
but just since we're here today, we might as well clarify if you would for me.
Yes,
The June 30th deadline
right,
is to get on the priority list for next year's session.
correct.
So in other words, and this applies to the kind of the pressure on us to vote through a project, and certainly
Right.
then when it gets to the RTM, if it does, then as them as well. We have Riverfield out there somewhere too. So the question is, if it does not meet that June 30th deadline, what are the options at that point? Is there a way still to get that in next session somehow, or I guess I'm just looking
Special
at
legislation, right?
Yep.
Right?
And some towns do it.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to get special legislation on it.
Isn't, if I might, just to clarify, that special legislation, the notwithstanding, also known as notwithstanding
Yes,
legislation.
the notwithstanding list.
Isn't that very often done at the end of the term, so that's done in June? So technically, when this would be approved again would be in June. Is there any advantage at that point, or are you approving the special legislation and potentially this at the same time next June if it didn't hit this June?
No, it may be the earlier legislative year, too. It could be February. That's when
Okay, so you can get the notwithstanding done earlier in the year, so you could proceed from that point?
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify that, because very often it seems like it comes up at the end of term.
It will this year, for Osborne Hill, for example, which they're working on that one, You know, and that was an emergency. I mean, that was completely understandable why we would need special treatment on that. But, you know, that's going to go through as part of the school construction bill, which is usually passed on the last day of the session, which in this case is June 5th. So next year's a short session, so it starts in February and ends in May. There's no reason why it has to wait till the end of the session, but typically that's when it's done. You know, obviously, we'd rather avoid this and do this on the proper timeline, but, you know, if we can't, we can't. And
Right.
try to do our best. I mean, we certainly have some urgency around this for the reasons I outlined, but if for some reason, you know, you can't do it, we'll do our best.
There's other towns that go ahead and proceed with funding their own project regardless of state reimbursement because the confidence is high that it will be reimbursed. So many towns spend millions of dollars on the planning and the initial construction, knowing that they're a year delayed in the application process. And it's just a part of their part of doing business and getting those spaces ready for the kids sooner.
Such as Wallingford.
Right. And I think in here, Bill has the timing of the project laid out. Right,
I do.
in here, so you can see the process, and, you know, the kids are already here in the school, so the sooner we can get things built, the better.
Any other questions on the process?
No, we're good on the
All right.
process, thank you.
Okay,
then let me-
that was the process.
Yep, let me just,
Okay.
actually.
That was the warm-up. Okay.
You're not done yet, though.
No, I know.
Just a couple.
Okay.
And Dr. Title, again, my compliments to you in terms of bringing up some different thoughts in terms of how we can do this. I remember standing out in front of Ludlow Middle School with Mr. Cullen and Mr. Morabito talking about, does everybody do it the way we do in Fairfield? And their answer was a resounding no.
Right.
So
So I
Looking
took me
forward
to
to-
pound it home, huh?
yeah. Well, you know, it's to some degree, it's a chicken or egg effect. I mean, historically, what we've done is hand the building committees a ed spec and say, tell us how much it's going to cost.
Right.
As we've started to do a more thorough job of capital planning, and again, that's what the waterfall chart does, is lay out what our capital needs are,
Yeah.
when we expect to bond them, and what that means from an annual debt service standpoint, and debt service being one of the key cost drivers in our budgets and tax increases. We're now more or less laying out both a budget ahead of time with some improved intelligence by getting an architect involved earlier in the process before the building committee is formed. And in essence, you've also pointed out we're providing improved specs, and I'm going to say direction to the building committee, kind of define the scope in more detail. To me, this creates the opportunity, in fact, increases the probability that if I pick one of my favorite examples of things run amok, that we're less likely to spend $3,000 on an automated drop-down screen, as we did at Sherman School, and more likely to spend $300 on a pull-down screen, which is all we need, if we know the budget ahead of time and we know we're doing those trade-offs. The other thing I think that happens is where we hand a building committee an ed spec, and they might go away for a year and a half, and then come back with a number. If we don't like that number, we've just wasted a year and a half of volunteer time, and we're way behind the construction schedule, and we're now behind the 8 ball on a long-range plan, and all sorts of emotions come into play, and I don't think that's fair to our volunteers. I don't think it's fair to the school system. I don't think it's fair to our kids. And it's certainly not fair to our taxpayers if we're not giving them a more accurate plan in terms of what we're trying to address. So I think that looking at this creates an opportunity for, if we're off the mark, I think it seems to me that we're more likely to get a much faster response from our building committee saying, we've sat down and there's no way we're getting this done within the budget, as opposed to coming back and saying it really is going to take twice what you guys were thinking to get this project done, and having the sticker shock come to all the various boards on that side. So I think that this has a real opportunity to improve how we look. I also think that Dr. Tuttle is right on the mark. No system's perfect. There will be hiccups and glitches with this, and we're going to have to work through this. The question I think we have to answer is, where are we most likely to get the hiccups and glitches? And in a tighter economy, I think it's better to have a budget ahead of time, look at the scope, and kind of get to that answer quicker and back to the boards. If we need to make adjustments, let's do that as soon as we can in a project life cycle, rather than way at the end of the project. So that gives me, I for one, again, appreciate Dr. Title's suggestion on how to do a new approach here, and I think it makes sense to give it a try. So that's the end of my comments on the process.
Good.
You guys ready to move on to the
Would you like to
Step
simply
two, if
ask
you
questions
would.
about the scope, or would you like Bill to walk through it? It's really however you want to use the time. If you already feel like you know it well, then I won't bother you.
Could you, it would help me, given the different components of this, and because this is pretty new to our board. I mean, we've spent time, Dr. Title, as you pointed out, we've lived with the windows for years. There are a few questions off the top on some of those things, but I think it might be helpful for us framing it to have an overview of the project and the different components, why they're consolidated or accumulated in this one project, and then how the timing would work. Are they still treated as separate projects? Are you going to do them as one? Give us a little bit of the game plan behind
Right,
that.
I think I'll have Bill do that. I'm available for questions, too.
Part of this initial study process is virtually the due diligence, essentially of us architects who are really an independent source that have worked in other schools that really question and grill the educational staff on their needs. So it is that testing of the program before your building committee gets it, and they're kind of wallowing in programming, that we get to ask the hard questions. And Principal Greg Hatzis really gave us great information that showed that especially science, which usually drives the scheduling at all high schools, has 19 teachers, only 7 of which are in their rooms all day. The other 12 orbit through the various rooms, which is very unusual for most high schools. Your scheduling diversity in your science labs alone is nearly 100%, and that puts an incredible burden on scheduling the rest of the school and all the other curriculum elements, because the schedule is built around science, and that ties their hands, and it does affect the children. In this case, the need for 2 more science rooms is more than justified in ours, as well as the 4 additional classrooms. The increase of 100 students obviously justifies the 100 lockers, so that's a straight line math line item, but that 100 students yields square footage. We also are the due diligence of looking at the total school picture, not just the windows and the roof, but we look at the square footage and the reimbursement to the town. Unfortunately, Ludlow is not overbuilt, it's not excessive in size. In other words, based on the number of students that are expected there, you will receive the full potential reimbursement. It will not be derated just because Ludlow is bigger than the state standard. So those are some of the due diligence elements that we architects dive into as part of the study. It helps, especially your finance people, understand the return on the investment that you do have.
And just to clarify that, the reimbursement rate we're at is about 27%.
That's correct.
Our effective reimbursement historically has been between 21 and 22%.
After
Is
you
that a
derate,
fair?
yes, after you take out ineligible expenses.
Okay, so the expectation for the reimbursement percentage for this project would be, or your planned reimbursement percentage for this would be?
It's actually going to be slightly lower. We list it about 2.5. It's going to be closer to 18 or 19%, and that's because, for instance, Windows is a significant element that is only partially eligible from the state. There's nothing you can do to make Windows fully eligible. And so nearly $2.8 million deals with the windows alone out of this budget, and that's only, that's substantially reimbursable, but not fully reimbursable. So that's a case of you can't, in our calculations, we cannot receive that 27.5% eligibility at any cost, short of special legislation, which is always the way around any state regulation. To quickly highlight, the 6,500 square foot cafeteria addition is to relieve the congestion that happens in that space. With those students, it is so bad that they don't go there for lunch sometimes. We also square up the space and move it to the south where it has its energy benefits. It also makes it a better rectangular square shape, so it's better for community and school organizations rather than the long linear corridor that you have right now. So there are some planning improvements that go with the need of the larger cafeteria. The kitchen has light renovations associated with it, mostly the storage that is sorely needed. The 2 science classrooms with their prep rooms that are sorely needed as well certainly have a premium cost that go with them. The 4 classrooms total 3,400 square feet, and you've seen the breakdown in the book that you've received. Obviously, the windows at over $2.8 million is probably 85% of the windows are being replaced as part of it, and with it goes those dastardly PCBs that only reared their ugly heads in 2010. From the EPA, yes.
85% of the windows in the entire building?
Yes, will be replaced as part of this. None of the ones that are modern or recently done that are energy efficient. It's all the energy inefficient windows from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that building is largely 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then obviously the roof replacement goes without saying, taking care of 120,000 square feet that is at the end of its useful life, and of course you knew it's been planned and programmed for a while. So that's the quick nickel tour. Two schemes that were considered. One is favored over the other because it is less disruptive of the second courtyard. Scheme 1 is more compact in that it is a 3-story addition in the one courtyard, affecting the backside of the cafeteria and the kitchen, while the cafeteria addition moves out further to the south. So that's why Scheme 1 was favored. The costs are virtually the same. If anything, it is simpler sequencing and construction sequencing that we believe at this conceptual study time is most effective. But once your building committee is charged with this, well, they have, usually most building committees have the responsibility to meet budget and program. Their only other charge usually is where to put the additions. And that's where they, with their architect, will look at a new schematic design phase where they'll interview the educators again. They'll go through all those space needs of those 6 new spaces. They'll talk with the food service people much more detailed than we will. And they may derive a new plan, but it still has that obligation of roughly the same square footage, roughly the same budget. It may not just be in the same spaces that we indicated. Hopefully it will be better than what we indicate. There are many ways to skin a cat when it comes to planning and architecture. So I think that's enough said. We include furniture, fixtures, and equipment down at the bottom of our estimates for the classroom, the science, and the cafeteria spaces, and then as well as all soft costs and a reasonable contingency, which gives the wiggle room for escalation. Hopefully we can beat that with competitive, a competitive environment when this finally hits. And also in the handout that you had, or the book, and we call the conceptual study, we estimate that construction will take place from 2014 through 2016. So it's a good, long process. You cannot take all those classrooms out of service to replace all the windows, so it will be a sequential move around the buildings, kids moving out of a classroom for 2 days, moving back into the space as the windows are replaced. So it's a multiple phase project, and obviously the construction manager that is brought on early, as Fairfield does, helps in that planning. And I've said enough.
I want to just make one comment about the cafeteria and the program implications there. Right now, our high school schedules actually do not allow for a dedicated lunch period at either high school. To me, it's a flaw and really needs to be corrected in a new schedule. It's been pointed out several times, but one of the big blockers in that is that for us to run lunch waves in that cafeteria requires expansion. We really cannot have run a normal high school schedule there because the cafeteria is too small. And I know Tom has worked with the fire marshal to try to come up with other ways of doing it and organizing tables and so forth, and it's just not able to be done. So the volume of students in that school is not supported by the, that particular piece of infrastructure. But it is blocking us from doing really a much better job of our high school scheduling because of that deficiency.
Any questions from the board?
Just, thank you very much. Can you help me reconcile your comments about the 18 to 19% net reimbursement with the bottom of page 2, where it talks about the $2.45 million? I'm not connecting the dots between your comments and that paragraph. I think the math seems to be different. Or am I looking at it wrong?
No, you're not. Probably at this conceptual stage, we haven't dissected the estimate. We haven't gone into a detailed schematic design or construction cost estimate, not part of a conceptual study. And this gives you the general reimbursement rate that the town could expect of the 2.45. When the details start really being fleshed out by your building committee, we fully expect them to find ineligible costs, like a portion of the window expense, which is the labor. half of the labor is not
Right.
eligible from the state, things like that. So this report did not dissect ineligible costs down to that degree.
Understood, and the windows would obviously be the largest variance to that formula because of the nature of the reimbursement process for windows. Is this, how old is this report, this information here?
January of 2013.
Oh, okay.
And it's based on 2013 construction estimate costs.
Can we get some updated information? Or, I mean, can the report be updated to reflect what you think is going to be reimbursed based on what you know now that you did not know then, or what you think might be the case? Or,
It can, it just
if not the
goes to
report,
a-
maybe a memo or
It goes
something?
to a higher level of detail that it really wasn't justified for a conceptual study. It's a broad brush look. You're kind of asking for a schematic level estimate. It can be done, sure.
We're looking for something a little more detailed than this, but maybe not as detailed as you might fully get.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
We take a step
Maybe
back.
even break down by project type, right? So the roof is this much, we would expect this much reimbursement. The windows cost this much, the windows, we would expect this kind of reimbursement, the expansion. So break
Yeah.
it down by by the three projects,
That
something
would be
like that.
helpful. I'm just trying to close the gap between this preliminary language and your comments.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's really my
That's a
question.
fair point, yeah.
So every time you meet with an architect, either it's now or 2 months from now with the schematic design architect, you're always going to get refinements. I can never give you enough
Understood.
detail. Okay.
Yeah.
Just a
Kristen, go
question.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. In terms of the schedule here, just curious, I'm looking at item ID number 16, RTM approval, with a September date there, approval on design development. So what's your thought with having that there? If you're saying we have the June 30th deadline, I'm just wondering if I'm understanding that.
This was us architects without any input from the
Okay.
educators,
Right.
assuming the process would take longer to get
Okay.
it through to the RTM.
Right.
But it also assumed that the town could choose to do that first phase, schematic design phase, during the summer. Could choose. If you wanted to fund it. So it's based on my ill-informed thoughts of the process.
Mhm. Sure.
So, and part of why I asked that is just with respect to the 2014 construction. So
Mhm.
if, for example, the RTM approval process were to happen sooner, does that impact the construction beginning date at all?
No, it would still be 2014 because there's a solid
To
6 to
design.
8 months of planning time. And probably part of the schedule is based on my experience going through Stratfield.
Right.
Where we had that feasibility study before we went to RTM. This process now virtually represents that feasibility study, and I muddled them together, I think. And that's why I gave more time for a schematic design, when in reality at Stratfield, it was a feasibility study. It was what we did now on a much more protracted basis.
Mr. Kiley, did you have any follow-up at this point?
Nothing else on the schedule or the process?
Guess I've got a couple overall. Start with PCBs, obviously a topic we've spent a lot of time on in the past year. Going back, when we were just talking windows, PCBs came up. Could you tell us a little bit about the testing we've gone through? How do we know what the scope of the PCBs is? How do we know this is not going to blow up into another Osborne Hill where
You guys want to talk about that? Yeah. This is Sal Morbido.
Hi. The testing that was being done at Ludlow was somewhat concurrent with this conceptual study. It turns out that the testing was completed. It's posted on our website. It's consistent with what was assumed by Silver Petrocelli. So we're in the same ballpark as to the remediation that's outlined here. When that report, the report from AMC Environmental came in that finalized all that testing, I turned that over to Bill Silver so that he can review it with his hygienist to make sure that there's no revisions that we needed here. And we came to the conclusion that this is properly covering the PCB abatement.
Okay, so let me restate that to make sure I heard that.
Okay.
We've done all the PCB testing we need to do and are going to do, and any PCBs that we're going to find have been found, and the estimates are included in this number.
Correct.
Reasonably.
Reasonably.
Only until we know what areas are going to be demolished, wall sections taken out. For instance, we can't test the water.
Yeah, I think you need to be up to the mic.
We can't test, at this conceptual stage, you don't want us to pull apart brick walls where we don't know where the additions are going until 6 months from now when we know. When we pull those apart, we will then test that black waterproofing mastic. It may have it, we assume right now it does, but we don't know. So to answer your question literally, no, we don't know everywhere, but we feel that we have enough covered in the estimates and the quantities to deal with it because we have so much PCB experience in other schools.
Yep. Yeah.
But on the
I'm not-
window point,
Yeah.
we are done.
Okay. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
box you into anything. I'm
Right.
really trying to quantify
Right.
what you know versus what you don't know at this
There's
point,
little we don't.
to get a
Yeah.
greater degree of confidence in the number before us. The Osborne Hill, as we progressively tested, we
Right.
progressively found more PCBs.
Right.
Have we, and understand you can't test inside the walls without opening up the walls. Have we tested on outside the walls, or have we done kind of preliminary testing, and we'll
What-
do much more extensive testing when we get involved in the project? I guess I'm just trying to get
Okay,
that.
the PCB testing was for the window portion of the project. Inside the conceptual study, there's hazardous material removals that are envisioned and are estimated in here. We have not tested for that, the items that Bill was talking about, where we're going to punch through a wall or lift up a floor. But the windows, we know which windows have them, we know how much it leached into the brick, where that occurred, different areas of construction, different types of caulk. So it's very detailed. The report is actually like 500 pages. That's up on our website for that.
On the windows.
On the windows.
Right.
Thank you for reading that for us.
Yeah, right. Right.
But one of the things I think we got into with Osborne Hill was some air quality issues with PCBs, and have we done anything along those lines, or is that kind of testing yet to be done?
When we had the initial testing done, actually, when the TFC had the initial testing done, and I believe that was in October of
That was in the fall of 2010, I
10,
think.
it came up that there were some interior samples similar to Osborne, interior samples that contained PCBs. We did air and wipe samples when that occurred, and they came up clean. Then we proceeded with the rest of the testing. Osborne Hill, you know what happened. It didn't come up clean, and that's why the hunt went on, because we did have air problems.
Now, one of the things you've been doing at other schools is that, what I'm going to call indicator testing, doing that, is it chlorine?
Chlorine screening.
Have you done that through Ludlow yet?
Yes, that was part of the report.
Okay, so you have that level of screening that has been done.
Right.
And that's where part of your confidence comes from in terms of what you're looking at.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to clarify where we are versus
That's
where
fair.
we're not.
Yep.
Let's see, if I look at student projections, we're saying we're about 1,400 students in currently or capacity. and we're
Your
gonna
ed, your ed specs have the chart in there.
Yep.
Well, that's a different one, Kristen. We updated the enrollment projections in the ed specs is the best one, and because actually what we did was we asked our demographer to update just special for this project, to update the Ludlow projections. And they're in the ed specs, and you can see the table in there that shows the capacity is 1,400. The point at which we complete the addition, it goes to 1,525, and then you can see the student population out 8 years. It's actually a requirement of filing with the state that you project your population out 8 years, and they determine your reimbursement on your highest number in those 8 years.
Okay, so that max is at 17, 18? Did
Correct.
somebody mention over 1,800 just earlier part of this presentation, or did I miss that?
I think it does go to that.
It goes to 17, 18, and 16, 17.
Okay.
That's what I'm seeing.
All right.
But you're, if I may.
Am I on the
That
wrong
was in
page?
the prior,
That's the
Yes,
page I'm on.
you're right, but the 1,800 number may have come from.
from the MGT study, right?
Yes.
Right.
The previous projections that were in here
Right.
didn't go up past 1,800.
Yeah.
The updated numbers in the ed spec do not.
Okay, good.
Okay, so
We got
we're-
that from somewhere. Thank you for bailing me out.
So if I look at this, this enrollment number of 1552, that's good for today?
That'll be next year.
Next year.
Projected for next year.
This says 1213. I'm on page 3 of the ed spec.
Our current enrollment right now is 15.
Greg Hatzis. Numbers move around.
Our current enrollment at this time, this day, changes, literally within a couple of days, but it's 1528 right now, so. That may have been a past projection of this year.
Okay. All right, so we're roughly
We're over.
15 and a quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're over where we are. We're going to spend $11 million and have a capacity of 15 and a quarter that meets today. That's, in dollars per student, that seems like a lot.
Well, you're only spending a certain amount of that on the expansion. I mean, regardless of how, the windows are a cost and the roof is a cost, so you have to look at to isolate the cost of the expansion as, what we're
that-
spending to increase the capacity by 125 students, so,
And there's core spaces as part of the.
right,
No, fair point. Is
Yep.
there somewhere that's broken out?
yeah. The cost of the expansion, right?
Yeah, it's the first block on that, page 21, the expansion,
We have
That's
it.
We're back in a conceptual study?
3.8
Yeah.
million, correct.
Right, right, Bill's got it on there, page 21 on the conceptual study.
Expansions and renovations. It's
Right.
3.8 million.
Before the soft costs.
Okay, I'm sorry, could, just to speed us along, could somebody just step me
Okay,
through
Bill.
where that is?
First one.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
That first block at the top made up of cafeteria expansion and alterations, kitchen, science classrooms, 4 classrooms, new lockers, and then the abatement cost is 3.8 million. So that isn't your pure addition cost, that's your additions and renovations.
Okay, so it's 3.8 million out of the 11
Correct.
is in essence for,
You'd have to add some of the soft
Oh,
costs.
yes, yeah, right.
given we're going to have 1,700 and something students, what's the plan or approach for managing that excess capacity? Or not excess capacity, but excess load?
Well, to be honest, it's kind of what we're doing right now. I mean, we're built for 1,400 and we're at 1,525. So, that's it's difficult. We manage. We have teachers sharing classrooms. It's hard for students to locate teachers if they wanted extra help because they're not always located in the same place. We have carting of materials going around all over the building, especially in science, and so. I think that through these discussions, we clearly were aware that, we weren't building toward what the highest enrollment was going to be to try to manage, the project and, be respectful of the town and the taxpayers. But, we do face, those daily battles with crowded hallways and whatnot. While this project adds classrooms and cafeteria space, that core space will help us a lot when it comes to lunch waves and maybe even being able to host some whole class functions and those types of things. It doesn't really do anything for our hallways. I mean, there won't be any new hallways added, basically. So, we will still be faced with that. That is an issue where maybe we can try to regulate with flow of traffic and certain things. those are things that high school students aren't really used to. They're used to being a little bit more free and where they have to go, but, we may have to put some things in place to help, the traffic flow and that type of thing.
No, it's, I think it was, I wouldn't call it a compromise, but I think there's a balance between, building out to the absolute perfect thing that you want, knowing that it's probably unaffordable, and getting enough on the table to relieve the pressure. I also think if we change to a different schedule, right now we run all 8 periods every day, which means kids are in the hallways changing classes 7 times a day. Your hallway congestion would be reduced if you didn't have as many class changes. They wouldn't be in the hall 7 times. They might be only in the halls 4 times. I mean, that would be an outgrowth of a different schedule that you could do if you were able to expand the cafeteria and the core spaces. I'm sure there are people who would say, you're not asking for enough. We've heard that.
What's the projections go through 2021? Do you see them dropping off after that? Do we have any, realize the further you go out, the less reliable we are. What's the game plan there?
Yeah, it's really not that reliable that much farther out, because really, once you go beyond that, if you think about your kindergarten class, right, is projecting them out 9 years into 9th grade, those are known kids. Once you go beyond the 9 to 10 year mark, now you're talking about predictions about birth. And that's where, this town has been notoriously all over the place. Has been predicting kindergarten enrollment, and not only kindergarten enrollment generally, but kindergarten enrollment by school. So it's really, there's not a lot of confidence out there in projections that go beyond that chart that you have there. That's why I think partially we asked the demographers to limit it to kids we knew that were already in our school system, because that's what we're most, we've got a very good track record of knowing what percentage of kids move from one grade to the next. It's called cohort survival. Track record on predicting kids coming in to kindergarten has been much less reliable, and the subject of great debate in this town for many years.
Indeed.
He said, understating things.
How does Ward compare in this? What's the population at Ward taking place at this time? What's the capacity there, and what's the student load there?
Same capacity.
Yeah, it's got the same capacity, and it's got
1,400?
Yeah, it's got,
Yes.
yeah,
And they're just over 1,400 now.
right. So they've got not a perfect situation either, but it's not nearly the situation that Ludlow is in and projected to be in. The schools closed the gap a bit there, but Ward still could probably use some additional space, but in trying to prioritize things, Ludlow is definitely the top of the list in terms of the space crunch that is here now and is only going to get worse.
Yeah. Any opportunity for rebalancing between the high schools?
You want to redistrict?
He didn't use that word. He used a different word, didn't he?
Yeah. I will say that the Board of Ed had
Just to be
discussions
absolutely
about
clear,
that.
Between spending $11 million and redistricting,
Right.
yeah, I think we ought to talk about redistricting.
Yeah, well, remember, your $11 million, your roof and your windows are not enrollment dependent.
Mm-hmm.
All right? So we're talking about expanding. The issue is that if you take any elementary school and you shift it, all you're going to do is shift the problem over to Ward. So now you create an overcrowding at Ward as opposed to an overcrowding at Ludlow. So then you'd have to go spend your money at Ward. So it's just...
Is there some reason we have to move a whole elementary school?
No, you don't have to move a whole elementary school.
Historically, over time, this town has split elementary schools and had them go one way and another way.
Right. And I will say, the board discussed that at great length several times and decided that was not a good option, that wouldn't solve the problem. It would simply shift the overcrowding from one to the other. Discussed about possibly, could we move out the pre-K program, early childhood program out of Ward and put it somewhere like the senior center. And we sort of costed that out, and it was clear that that would cost even more than a renovation would that we're proposing here. So again, I think you have to look at it as the renovation costs are your marginal costs here, your expansion costs, not your windows and your roof replacement costs.
No, and that's a fair point. Thank
Yeah.
you for pointing out it.
Right. It was considered and
also,
not
thank you for
done.
breaking it out here on the page, too. That makes it a
Right.
lot easier to see.
Yep.
Are there any planned expansion for Ward in the next few years?
No.
So we're going to leave Ward as it is.
Well, there are
Do we have-
renovations of Ward in the long-range plan, but not expanding the footprint there.
Do we have the same chart on page 3 of the ed spec available for Ward?
Not updated though.
Yeah, right. We don't have that for Ward. We have it from the MGT report
Right.
that Kristen looks like she has, which is
From
from
December
2010.
2010.
December of 2010.
Okay. Is that-
Um,
That's not this, right?
Pretty old.
Right. The Ward enrollment is actually, seems to be trending a little higher. So we know that in the aggregate, our high school population is going to continue to grow. All you have to do is add up the number of kids that are currently in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and compare them to what we have in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And how they, how they sort themselves is perhaps a question, but our enrollment is going to continue to go up at both high schools. At this point, Ward is in a better position, although not a perfect position, to handle the increased enrollment that's coming to them. So they're not staying at 1,400 or 1,450. They're going to be going up. So again, moving 100 kids, say from Ludlow to Ward, all that's going to do is take all the problems we have at Ludlow and shift it over to Ward. And therefore, you'll be in the same boat at that school. And the longer we wait on it, the worse the problem will get. If these kids are coming. They're here, they're coming, we don't have to imagine them.
Did I hear correctly in part of the budget presentation that we were able to, we had to add teachers at the high school level to take advantage of this, but we were also able to reduce teachers at the elementary school level because the population there was trending down?
Yeah, the high school population, because it's going up, we had to add teachers. We also did project fewer teachers at the elementary school. There's a small decrease in enrollment projected at the elementary level. The decrease in teachers was more to just the way the kids sorted themselves out in our class size guidelines than some precipitous drop. That number keeps moving around on us. I mean, just when we thought the elementary enrollment was starting to go down, I think it's our first grade now has like 825 kids, which is a big number for us. That would be, 4 of those would be 3,300 high school kids, which is more than we have now. So we're seeing some variation at the elementary level, but certainly the increase seems to have stopped there. And some of the middle school, we're moving kids around in the middle school, but they're basically flat. So yeah, there's fewer teachers at the elementary level, but it's more to do with sort of the quirks of different grade levels than some big drop in elementary enrollment.
I mean, I've got some more, but I don't mean to.
If you want to take a break out.
Go right ahead.
I have a few. Good. If we go back to page 21, the budget, can you just help me understand what are the basic components of the $360,000 for the furniture, fixture, and equipment, the FF&E line? Like, back to a comment that Mr. Tetro has made a number of times about the pull-down screen, et cetera, things like that. Just what things are in there, what things are not in there, what's contemplated?
Almost always, it's simply tables and chairs. Lab bench work is part of the FF&E cost. Certainly whiteboards, marker boards, and yes, quite often, smart technology is included in our numbers. At these prices, there's probably smart technology, especially in the science classrooms, that are included, perhaps not in the general classrooms. So our FF&E numbers are usually just the raw instructional the furniture, not even instructional material, the raw furniture that's needed to seat 26, 28 kids in these classrooms, plus teachers, file cabinets, bookcases perhaps at most.
Is it possible to get like a follow-up schedule roughly about the types of items or the quantities of the items that might make up the lion's share of the 360, just so we'll have a rough idea of what things are in there and what things are not in there? I don't need it tonight. We can
Yes.
look at it later.
Yes.
if I could ask that, please. My next question is, I believe early on, I may have misheard the comment, but I believe I heard, and I forget who made it, it might have been Dr. Title, but I'm not sure who to attribute it to, that some of the space needs are being driven because science is the lead core curriculum that drives scheduling and drives room availability and all those other kinds of things that must fit around that. Was that correct?
That was my statement, yeah.
That was good. Can you just help me understand that and why it is that way? And are there any options that could be used, or are there any options that might, allow us to differently or better use our space in general from a scheduling perspective?
Sure. I'll start, and Patrice Vigella, our science curriculum director, is also here, so she can maybe come up and we can join forces. But I'll start just by saying that the way in which we schedule science is that every class starts with a 5-day-a-week class, and then in addition, either 1 or 2 additional periods for a lab, in which so if there are 2 additional lab periods, the class may meet, say, period 1, 5 days a week, and then period 2 on Tuesday and Thursday. And so with that, by coming into another period, a child cannot take another 5-day-a-week class during period 2. So that's traditionally where we might try to fit PE in, because that's a 2-day-a-week class, or a study hall or something. So that's one of the main factors that drives how our schedule works. So you would have to have contiguous periods in order for that to work. Now, we happen to have a rotating schedule. So what happens is that periods say 3 and 4 might be contiguous on Monday, but period 4 might rotate to the end of the day, so you couldn't have that lab meet on Tuesday. So because of the rotation of our schedule, as well as the science requirement, there are only very specific combinations that we have. So to answer your question about are there other ways to do it, as Dr. Title mentioned, the investigation of a new schedule that might increase instructional time for classes and maybe eliminate the need for additional lab periods. So there's a number of different options we can explore with a different schedule. Under the confines of what we currently have, I can only say we have tried everything, and it's quite an operation to schedule what we have. I'll give you an example of how it can be limiting. Since there are only certain periods that we can do, let's say we're going to schedule an AP biology class, maybe there's 2 sections of that and they have to fall into certain periods. And we want them to meet at different times so that students have the option to take different periods to fit other things around them. Right. Well, if that conflicts with, say, another, AP literature class or, another, say, culminating high-level course for some of our students that are successful, anytime you say this class has to be in that period, you're creating a constriction where when you're trying to schedule and find ways to get the kids as many of the requests that they have, your hands become tied as to the flexibility that you have to move that period around. And when science tells us it has to meet that time, our flexibility gets limited in order to meet the requests that the students have, for what they would like to take, for moving on past high school.
Right. So just following up on that, and I think I understood most of that. Thank you. Does that situation allow or cause any utilization issues with either science rooms that can't be used because of it, or classrooms that can't be used because of that situation?
You want to, Patrice?
Hi.
There you go.
Hi.
Good evening.
The answer is yes and no. It can, in some cases, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking in the example that Greg gave about period 1 and period 2, does that then mean that classroom cannot be used for period 2 for other purposes on the days that the labs are not meeting?
That, and in addition, in the big picture, does this scheduling scenario leave any unutilized classrooms beyond an unreasonable amount?
I wish I could find some unutilized classrooms. That would be a big help to me. But it happens in very limited ways because of the way the schedule rotates. So if you have a class period 1 that has the labs in period 2, because those 2 periods meet first thing in the morning, and then we have a homeroom block,
Right.
we're unable to dovetail another class into those empty period 2 slots. But in every other case, and actually, maybe a visual would be helpful to you, so I'd be happy to send you what it looks like on paper.
That'd be great, thank you.
The chemistry rooms, for example. Periods 3 through 8, which is the balance of our day, there is very rarely an empty block. What happens is if there's a class that meets period 8 as its regular period, there are 2 ways that we can get those 2 double periods in. It can either be period 5 or period 7. So there are classes that are dovetailing together. It's like a little jigsaw puzzle. So if you like puzzles, this is a fun exercise to do. And last year we ended up doing it by hand because the schedule is so packed that we felt we could get the best utilization of the rooms by doing it by hand. Took a long time, but it's
Right.
So
it's
if
worked.
period 8 is the class, and period 7 is the lab. Period 7 might also be the lab in that classroom for period 5.
Right.
Say. You know, so we utilize, we're literally close to 100% utilization. I mean, let's put it this way. If our enrollment for next year were to necessitate a single extra section of science in any way, for either earth science, biology, chemistry, or physics, a single extra section, we would not be able to run the section. We would not have the space for it using a science classroom, which, they have all kinds of extra, different supplies than a regular general classroom. They have different power needs. Sometimes gas is necessary. Hood for safety. All the types of things that go with a science classroom. We would not be able to hold a class in a science classroom.
All right, so, thank you. And just back to one of your last comments about the utilization. So when you say the rooms are utilized close to 100%, within reason, is that the science rooms or all rooms?
I'll give you for science rooms, I would say, we're approaching 100%.
I'm hearing that.
For the rest of the classrooms, the general classrooms that could be used for just about any other subject, we have 8 periods in the day. So we did a little, room utilization study, and what we found that 25% of those rooms are used all 8 periods. Another 51% are used 7 of the 8 periods, so there's only 1 period of relief, if you will. And so that would leave 25% where maybe there are 2 periods free within that classroom. Now, in that kind of scenario, to utilize those rooms, it might require a teacher to literally travel to all different ends of the high school. And if you've been at Ludlow, and besides multiple levels, it's kind of long and narrow.
It's a big place.
It would be. Teachers would get to classes late. When we schedule them, we try to kind of keep them at least within the same couple of hallways, as we move them around. So, and as Bill mentioned in his presentation, we have a large number of teachers who are now in several different places, which, is not a great instructional model.
Right, and I realize I'm oversimplifying the math on the rooms, and that's not the best way of looking at the school. I was just trying to get to the big picture of, is the way that we're scheduling that's, specifically revolving around science, is there maybe a different or a better way that, would allow us to utilize other space?
Not within the schedule that we have.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Can I cycle back to the FF&E question? And this may not be enough detail for you, but in the ed specs, there's some examples of what goes into FF&E.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
And I just
Okay.
want to point that out. I know we just got that today, so I don't expect you to have memorized it, but if that's not a sufficient level of detail, let us know. We can get you more detail. It's on page 5. Page 5, interior spaces general, the last bullet point, where it says FF&E new spaces.
Yeah, I can quickly scan.
You see
through
that at the bottom, and then if it goes over to the
Yes.
next page
Yeah, thank you
for
that.
science.
I think,
And the technology is listed there as well. We know there's a sensitivity to not doing smart boards. You'll notice they're not in there.
right, and that's helpful, thank you.
So if you review that and you want more detail, we can provide it.
I think I do. I think
Yeah.
I just kind of want to see what's in, what's out, and what
Yeah.
they might cost.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
That just gives you, it's not just a fixed number.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that, and with respect to technology,
Yeah.
in terms of specs,
Yeah.
I like the model that you used from the big picture standpoint. Here's what we're doing, and here's what we're not doing.
Right.
If I look at this list of technology,
Right.
in my terminology, I would call that all infrastructure, and not
Right.
things that wear out in, X number of years, limited
Right.
timeframe, which is what we're worried about from a bonding standpoint.
Right.
And specifically the smart boards.
Right,
But
yeah.
computer technology, that type of thing.
This is probably
distinctly-
better labeled as infrastructure.
Well, that,
Yeah.
and perhaps maybe there's a line at the bottom that says, this does not include, however you want to phrase it, smart boards, computer technology,
Right.
that type of thing, so that it's clearly identified as this. The term technology, I know, has been clearly misunderstood and argued over greatly.
Yes.
At too many boards I've sat on.
You're right.
For way too many hours. And I think what
Yeah.
you're doing here is you're meeting the intent of everything we've talked about. And I guess the clarification, because it's now come up 2 building committees
Yep.
in a row recently where smart boards have been mentioned, and that certainly is a hot button in terms of what we are
Right.
distinctly not funding, and clearly what the intent of this is not to fund.
Right. Or put it in the charge, get it
so,
over with.
We just may do that. Yes.
That's just my suggestion.
I have a list, if I may start down the list, if I don't know
Please,
if
go ahead.
Selectman Kiley
The
was.
floor is yours.
On page 3 of the report, it talks about the conceptual study. Under report services, it says number 5, that high school enrollment up to 2016 was contemplated. Yet the ed specs numbers go through, 2021. I just want to feel confident that we're looking at the broader range and the bigger picture in terms of what we're doing today. Because certainly what we do today and any decisions we make now will have an impact past 2021. So I just wanted to ask why that was stated that way and confirm that we're looking as far down the road as we can in terms of projections, which we know become not as reliable later on.
Right, so these were 2 different pathways going on at the same time. So while Bill was given the MGT report and looked at it for that period of time, when we got this over to the Board of Ed, we had by that time updated the projections. And so the ed specs were done after the report was done. So that's why there's a little bit of a difference there. But it handles it all the way through that time frame.
Okay. In terms of the high school schedule, and I guess I just want to, before I ask these questions, make a couple comments. First, specifically about science. I think that it is critical that we assure every student who wants and needs to take science the opportunity to do so, as well as to participate in their lab. If nothing, we need more of that today. So that is a huge issue. And Dr. Title, you referenced the change in the high school schedule, which is something I also support being looked at again, and that the town looks at investing in that and investing in that change for our students and our future. In terms of looking at a contemplated high school schedule change, which I know is something that we've talked about in this town for a while, and it may not happen for a while as well. However, I'm hopeful that it will. So when we look at this proposed scheme and the possibility of a change in the high school schedule, you address the cafeteria. How about the rest of the building? Does that simply enhance the ability to then provide a different schedule? And does it do everything that we would need if we were to change the schedule? In other words, would this scheme allow the schedule to be changed?
Right, yes. And this, approval of this and the construction of this would enable us to contemplate a different schedule from the one we have right now, which does have its limitations, as everybody knows. And one of those limitations is in respect to science. You know, I mean, Patrice and I have talked about we would like to increase the amount of lab time that all kids get in science, not just certain classes. It's just not able to be done under the current restrictions that we have. So I think that's on the table. Now, we can't promise that's going to be enacted in the very near future because there's a lot of opinions about the high school schedule and there's a lot of implications to that. But it's something that we're committed to at least, studying next year with a committee, and if we can get to agreement, bringing it to the Board of Ed. But we would, we certainly have to take into consideration the physical restrictions of the building.
Okay. What's the current capacity of the cafeteria?
Right. I'd be
330? 330.
330?
That's what we're being told.
That's okay. So we're looking at, that's a significant jump in terms of capacity.
And kind of speaking to your last question, when we were last talking very, very deeply about a change in the schedule, one of the, one of the linchpins in all of that was the Ludlow cafeteria. In that, in order to create a schedule where we were able to embed a lunch for every student, so that they had that break in their day, and the rigor of the classes that they have, to have that moment, to just take time, eat a sandwich, socialize, maybe catch up on some homework or whatever it might be, just to have that break. We would not, and currently we would not be able to fit, unless we had so many waves of lunch that really would just, be incredibly disruptive. And, as Dr. Teitel mentioned, every time you're putting kids in the hallway, you're causing disruption somewhere else, and that overcrowding just kind of bubbles up to the surface. It would be really difficult for us to manage and fit the kids in the current cafeteria that we have. With a different model, with obviously an expanded cafeteria that allows us to really, embrace the possibilities of creating a schedule that would be conducive to what would be, a better day for students.
And before I ask my next question, I'll just follow up. Besides science, I think the chance to have lunch is great, and I'm aware that many students now skip lunch in order to be able to take the same kind of course load level that some of their peers in our neighboring communities are taking. So I just wanted to ask about the student and faculty lounges, and if maybe you can walk us through the changes there. Just with the reconfiguration for the seniors and the need for that, and the faculty lounge, my understanding is the faculty lounge is being moved in order to make space for classroom. Am I correct in that? And if you could just walk us through that a little.
Well, right now, you talk about neighboring high schools, and a lot of schools have designated spaces for faculty in lieu of an office. Individual offices. There's maybe a common office for the English teachers or the social studies teachers. We have no such gathering spaces for teachers. We have basically one gathering space for teachers if they're, when they're not teaching, and that is, what is, kind of loosely created to be a faculty dining area, which basically was a classroom. So we have a refrigerator and a microwave in there and some computers. They can't stay in their, in their classrooms, not that they have classrooms, but, their personal classrooms. They can't stay in the classrooms in which they teach because another class probably is coming in with another teacher. And, while they could work in the background, they don't either want to be disruptive or, they may want a quiet environment to grade papers or whatever it is. So, in order to actually, because that space currently, is basically the footprint of a classroom, we thought that, through our discussions with Bill, that maybe by recapturing that space, we could gain another classroom. And as, part of the addition, to recreate a space for the teachers that, would be more appropriate for them. It still doesn't solve our problem of having enough space for teachers, but basically they're finding nooks and crannies, back offices in the library, anywhere they can to accomplish the work that they have outside of their teaching assignment. So.
And can you also address the student side as well, in terms of
Right. So,
senior.
you know, one thing, you know, where, you know, students, you know, obviously, you know, schedule themselves. Juniors and seniors have the privilege, if they have a period off where they don't have a class scheduled, you know, and it may only be 1 day a week or 2 days a week. You know, in some cases, maybe a student has reached enough credits where they don't, you know, they don't have to take a, you know, a class in a particular period. You know, they want to find a space to do work. And currently, right now, their two choices are the cafeteria and the library. And, you know, we've also, you know, put some benches out in the hallways, you know, so that they could utilize, you know, just another space within the confines of the school. If you were to visit our library, say, you know, just come on in the middle of the day and see what that's like. What I can say is it's really exciting that a lot of students use our library, and that, you know, I think that would get, you know, people very excited, but it really isn't an environment anymore that's conducive to quiet study. You know, students are working together in groups. I mean, there's a lot of group projects that are going on, so, you know, they're working together. We have classes, obviously, that are utilizing the library as they come down to do research. You know, that's a big component of why it's there. But we don't really have a space right now for students to get quiet work done. The cafeteria as it is now is not an inviting space. It's not something that is a comfortable space. And of course, during lunch waves, you know, you have the usual chaos of a lunch period. So when we spoke with Bill in the conceptual study, one thing that I felt would be really a service to our students is to provide a space where it would be inviting to them, a place where they could do work, a place where they could gather, a place for clubs to meet and talk and plan, you know, fundraisers or, you know, community service events or whatever it is that they want to do. We currently are very limited in that. I mean, we have a courtyard. You know, it's really only accessible for a couple of months a year during the warm weather. And even that is actually, you know, a hill, basically. You know, it's the side of a hill. So we just don't have that right now, and that's part of why it's included in the plan.
Thank you.
Right ahead.
This is actually back to the hazmat abatement. Actually, I'm going to skip to code compliance for a minute. And I think I asked you this same question when we talked about Osborne Hill. In the report, if I read correctly, any kind of code upgrades and codes change all the time. You say that very clearly. But my concern is in terms of code compliance and any renovations, additions that we're doing, is there the possibility of extra costs that might come in with respect to code compliance, aside from the changes that you reference, changes in code, but as we touch existing space, this goes back to those conversations when we touch existing space and connect to it, that we have to go in and bring everything else up to code. So how might that play out here?
If I had to characterize it, low risk. Because the school has been modernized as part of the conversion to the high schools and the money that was expended then. There have already been reasonable code modifications and improvements made. Certainly the fire marshal inspecting the building every year that he does, any significant violations would already be on your list to correct, and they aren't. Are they possible? Certainly, any spaces that we currently touch have to be brought up. So the cafeteria has to be brought up for accessibility. Well, it's a large space, so there's not a lot of accessibility improvements, and that's usually what we think about code beside life safety. So in these schemes, the spaces that we are renovating or touching are pretty much already code conforming, and that's why I characterize the risk as low.
Okay. Great. And then my last question for now is with respect to security. And new doors, I think it's 55 new doors, if I have that correct.
Yes, correct.
And yet I noticed in the ed specs, just again, brief glance, on page 3, the project does not address the following: new and increased security measures. Well, I would assume that in some respects, the new doors may help with security But what are we saying no to with that new and increased security
Right,
measure? Because we're
that's-
saying yes
yeah.
to some things.
Correct. In other words, this is not intended to address what we might get from the Fairfield Police, who are doing a study of all of our buildings about what infrastructure improvements might need to be made. So we're not talking about making changes, say, to the main entryway that might be necessitated by the study that's being done by the police, or general security measures, in light of Sandy Hook. That was not the idea of this, that this was not an opportunity for the building committee saying, well, while we have this money, why don't we also tackle, other security issues? So the security issues that are contemplated as part of the project are clearly laid out. So that's the distinction.
Okay. All right, thank you for that.
Yep.
I'm good for now.
Colin?
I'm good for now.
All right, then if I might, we talk about the 3.6 million for the roof. Could you just give us an update on the roof repair that was done for the part of the roof that was blown off, and how that fits into this 3.6 million? How many square feet were damaged and repaired as part of that, and how many square feet are?
Yeah,
going
Sal will
forward?
know the details on that.
The roof that blew off at the end of January was 17,800 square feet. It has been fully replaced, down to the deck, insulation, and a new membrane. So that's in place, and it is a complete job. How it fits into this job, it would remain, it wouldn't be removed to be replaced, because we have a fully functional 20-year warranted roof.
We have two different numbers, two roof projects that were combined into this project, $1.8 million each. They were defined, I believe, before the roof blew off. So my question is, because we have 17,000 square feet of new roof because of the fortuitous of a windstorm, how does that impact the $3.6 million, and what's the total number of square feet we need for new roof?
There's, yeah.
Of the 120, the report almost predated that wind damage, 100.
I believe it did, it certainly the estimate
Right.
did, so that's why the question.
So it reduces it by approximately $340,000, $20 per square foot times the square footage that was replaced, virtually could be your reduction.
So the total roof square footage that we're talking about
17,800 square feet.
in
From
the
the
project, the 3.6
120.
million, how many,
We calculated 120, so if you subtract the 17 from that, you are virtually at 103,000 square feet of roof.
So the 120 included the 17 of repaired.
Yes.
Okay.
all right, and the 120 is, whoa, step me through that then. How do we get to the 3.6 million?
Those were your gross numbers, including all contingencies, soft costs. But those are your waterfall numbers?
Yeah.
Yes.
Those are your waterfall numbers.
Right.
The numbers, those,
Yeah, it's probably, when you're asking, you're looking on Bill's report, you're
Is
looking
that,
at the 2.6.
what page is that?
Page 21. I think I understand what you're asking. You're seeing the 2.64,
Correct.
Right.
but that's quote-unquote escalated down below with the soft costs and contingencies by 25%, so.
correct.
That's where you're seeing the 3-point-something million dollars for the roof.
Remember, your waterfall predated our study. Your waterfall is a kind of a preconceptual capital budget number. This $2.6 million that's in our estimate is a later number. It represents much more finite construction dollars. And that's why you don't see the $3.3 million number literally for roof in this conceptual study. You see a more detailed number of $2.6 million, plus the 25% in markups down below.
Okay. What, if I look at the 3.6, all right, well, we take this 2.6 number as a more update. We said 20% soft costs and
25.
25%, which is roughly 650,000. So that would get that up to 3.2. There's still another 400,000 or so Did that get moved someplace? Because the total project dollars came out about the same. Did the 400,000 go someplace else in the,
No, I think it was conservative estimating on the part of the waterfall because roof prices are so volatile. This one represents a 2013 unknown
I
number.
understand, but when we add up all the totals in the waterfall, they come up roughly to what's here, so that $400,000 had to go someplace else. Otherwise, it would be $400,000 less. I'm just trying to, and for $40,000, it'd just be rounding error, 400,000, I'm just trying to get a feel for where that number went.
I can see a big part of it probably went into PCBs.
It's actually a bigger difference.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if I'm reading this right, if you take I don't have my, well, I do a calculator, but it would be 103,000 times 22, which comes to roughly 2.2 if I'm doing my math correct. And that plus 25% is roughly 2.7-ish, right?
Oh, you're taking the benefit of the 17,000 of roof that's already been replaced.
Right, and
This
Right,
one
we're
hasn't.
not.
This
Okay, I
study hasn't.
understand. We're also trying to tie back the resolution, which is asking for 11 million and change. If we can save $700,000, because we've already done the roof.
340,000 is what you
Yeah,
said.
we'll round it to 700,000.
No, it's actually $900,000. If I take 103,000 times 22, if somebody wants to calculate that, it comes to like 2.2 million. And that times 1.25 is roughly 2.7 million bucks.
17.8,
We're still
$20.
chasing the 400,000 that moved.
Well,
Times
yeah, I'm just,
1.25.
So, we're both right.
yeah.
They're correct that it's $400,000 less than what's on page 21. We still haven't reconciled the $400,000 that, from the
Correct.
waterfall into that.
Correct. Yep.
So I guess that would be kind of one of the questions, just,
PCBs. Waterfall didn't anticipate PCB expenses, right?
That's the windows.
I know, but he's looking at the total authorization and wondering where that 400,000 went, and I'm guessing it went from the roof
Well,
into the PCBs.
Probably.
When you had the waterfall, you weren't anticipating $1 million in
just
PCBs.
from a rough analysis, if someone could do, just kind of take us from the waterfall chart to here, just to, and I'm not looking for, 3 pages of detail, but one sheet simplistically, here's the major segments, here's what they are, just so we can see where that changed, that would be helpful.
Does that work for you?
I think that's roughly what we're talking about.
We can get you
That's
copies
not
of
bad.
that.
I don't know how to share this
Oh.
easily, but
Yeah.
you basically,
Yes,
waterfall 11.4, estimates 11.6, without going into details, totals tie out. Could
That
you
would be
email that
helpful to have.
Yes.
off to us? Thanks. Thank you. That's, at least in my mind, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay.
Um, Let's see, with respect to windows, if, guys, okay if I go on?
Yeah, I might have a window follow-up, go ahead.
Windows, we talked about 2.8 million for windows, and that's replacing roughly 85% of the windows in the front. Could somebody tie us back? We came into this whole project, at least my memory came into this project back in 2009-ish, as Dr. Title mentioned, when this came before the Board of Finance. When I think Mr. Kyle and I were both sitting on that board at the time. And looking at a $3 million number then for window replacement, it was referred out to the TFC because we had difficulty with that estimate at that point. And also how many windows had to be replaced. There have been some studies done and some other things. Those numbers have gone back and forth from less than $1 million to almost $3 million. We're back at the almost $3 million number. Is there some way to take us from kind of what's happened, why are we up at the 85%, what happened in between?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I can. When we originally approached the Board of Finance, the scope of the project was basically all the single-pane windows within the building. There were 2 reports done back in 2004 and 2005. One was done by Perkins Eastman, who worked on the renovation addition project, and one was done by Hoffman Architect. Both of those reports had reported about 85% of the windows, 80 to 85% of the windows in fair to poor condition. Basically, all the single pane windows. They
Price point that they mentioned back then?
price point back then was 1.2 million, 1.4 million dollars. There was an analysis on that back 10 years ago. When it came to the point of bringing it to the TFC, they did their, we'll call it in-house analysis, and they came out with a very low number what they thought needed to be replaced. They hired Wiles Architect to go window by window and come up with a schedule. Wiles Architect came up with a number of 51% of the windows needed to be replaced, except we don't know about this PCB problem.
Right.
It just
That's the
turns
wild
out the
card.
PCB problems are basically at the single pane windows, which are 85% of the window. So it just made a full circle back to that quantity
So
of windows to be
In the
replaced.
2.8, how much of that is PCB cleanup mitigation?
It's broken down on your detail on page 21. The PCBs is $750,000.
So the PCBs trumped all those other
Okay.
studies. I mean, the back and forth on all that stuff, once you got into 85% of the windows have PCBs, that made it a pretty simple request. So you're talking about a project that's been around a long time. I think we're on year 9 on these windows.
Right. Go right ahead.
Windows. You know, this reminds me of phasing, speaking of Stratfield and windows, and that's one of the conversations I think we had talked about. But in terms of the construction process and any phasing needs, does that occur with the windows, or is it fairly easy to do all of that in one?
Fairly easy. It's moderately easy
Relatively.
in that there is some extraordinary separations. More hard barriers are required with PCBs than, let's say, with asbestos caulking, but not extraordinary. You can still remove your materials while the children are not in school after hours and have it air tested and cleared before they return the next morning. So there will be small phases of where we remove in the 2-story portion, virtually the entire 2-story curtain wall or the punch windows. So there's some complex phasing that goes on, certainly with the windows and even with the additions. And one of the questions you asked, Greg, is how do we develop the space, with the congestion? Certainly the construction managers help with that, but almost always we assume to build the additions first. That gets us some of the swing space that's needed to swing the kids in as we disrupt the recreation areas.
Could you just describe the air testing? How's that done and kind of, like, it sounds like you're talking about doing it in a matter of hours. Like, is there immediate turnaround on that?
Yes, they maintain an overnight lab, quite often in New York, and there's another one in Wallingford, that any of your environmental consultants that works directly for the building committee does get that turnaround, usually in 3 hours.
Okay, good. And my question was basically, can you do the work, get the testing done before the kids show up at class the next morning is where I was trying to get to. That just seemed
Yes.
like a lot to do in an after hours.
It is, and that's really, construction manager would truly phase I'm painting the worst picture of phasing with windows while kids are in school. They're going to almost likely schedule it all in the summers.
Okay.
The hazardous material, if they can, life is simpler in the summer.
Okay, if I continue?
Please.
Right. Could you give me a little bit more explanation on the cafeteria? At the risk of sounding too old fogyish, when I went through Ludlow, we had about 1,800 to 2,000 students there. And I realized that there are different classroom requirements, computer room requirements, space requirements, but kind of the cafeteria is kind of the cafeteria. As I remember, we did it in 3 to 4 lunch sections. What takes so much more space now, and are kids just eating bigger meals?
Kids are bigger.
Before Greg takes it, there's a minimal code requirement.
When you're talking to a small kid who played quarterback, Tom, that's not nice.
He'll go into the homeroom or the study halls and things
Yeah.
like that. Code, fire marshal limits you to one student per every 15 square feet. So right now, you barely have 300 seat child capacity or student capacity. We're increasing that to 450 with the expansion. So you have more code permitted space.
So it's a fire code issue in terms of
Starts with fire code.
square footage per student.
Correct. Now, fire code doesn't even begin to touch educationally appropriate study halls, things like that, that the space is used for more than just those 2 periods of lunch or lunch ways. I don't know if you want to go how your cafeteria is used. or
Well, it's just, again, we don't even have an auditorium that would fit more than one class, a freshman class. We would not be able to fit the freshman and sophomore class there. Whereas, and even with the cafeteria for 50, while in the seats you wouldn't be able to fit 2 classes, with the other spaces, you would be able to, with students standing in various places. So it affords us that, in the larger cafeteria. But also, in some of the stories that I've heard about, Roger Ludlow back in the day, that there were students that were, not just eating in the cafeteria, but, basically, in the hallways and in other parts of the building as well. Now, while we don't have, students who don't take lunch can receive a lunch pass to eat within, say, their English class or history class or something like that, so that they have a time to eat a brown bag lunch that they bring. But, having food in all the different parts of the building, obviously, could be a problem in terms of cleanup and mess, and, you want to keep a clean environment for students, especially with allergies, whether it's, peanut allergies and whatnot, but also, so that you don't have little rodents coming to visit, all those things, where having food in lots of different parts of the building isn't a great option. So that's, from what I understand, was also the situation, when Ludlow had the capacity at that time, so.
Yeah. Probably not back then, but perhaps in some more recent times. Okay. And then, so what's the square footage of the kitchen area, not kitchen area, but cafeteria now, and what's it going to be?
I believe the cafeteria right now is, don't hold me, I think it's 4,800 square feet in the cafeteria, which a large part of it is that main circulation spine that runs through it, so you cannot set tables up in it. And we're expanding it to 6,500 square feet.
Okay, but how much of that's additional square footage? Because this looks like you're multiplying 6,500 square feet times 280, so it looks like it's all new construction. Am I understanding that
What do you-
right on page 21, first line?
The 6,500 square feet represents its alterations and expansion. So we show the total square
Okay.
footage, not just the addition.
So the fact that you're expanding the cafeteria to be 6,500 square feet is just a statistical coincidence?
Right, it's about, I think I said roughly 1,500 square foot, maybe 1,800 square foot expansion.
Okay, and expanding the cafeteria that much costs just as much as building classrooms?
Yes, it does. Because it's large, long span space, column free. Large expanses of windows.
And interest enough cost, okay, and the kitchen renovations are just 700 square feet?
Correct.
Okay.
We're not touching the serveries or the food service areas as much as the storage.
Okay. And then, if someone could, are we using the house plan at Ludlow?
Yes.
Okay, with all this different expansion going on and all the different classrooms and kids moving from one place to another, can you fill us in on, does the house plan, how does that function? Is that mostly for guidance and advice to students, or does that actually impact the school operations and their academic experience?
This plan really wouldn't impact the house system as it currently stands, and that's because Ludlow was not built as a building to physically and geographically represent a house plan. Whereas Fairfield Ward High School, as I'm sure you guys know, was actually one of the first high schools in America to be built with the house plan in mind. So, as you move, from Melville Road, Fitz House, and Townsend House, and Pequot House, as they're called now, they're actually built in a configuration that would house a house. Whereas Ludlow was built in a more traditional manner. So where our houses are located, if you will, tend to, creep around hallways and go upstairs, and sometimes are, in both. So, currently, the way that we utilize the house structure is an organizational structure that benefits the students because it places a concentrated number of eyes of administrators, counselors, and a dean on a smaller number of students, so that they can keep track of the kids better, they can build relationships with them more, and that they can provide that support where when you have an approach where you have lots of different people looking at everybody, some kids could more readily slip through the cracks. So, but in terms of space, like I said, this plan would not alter or affect how we run the house system and its effectiveness.
Okay, thank you. I think that addresses, go right ahead.
Back to the cafeteria. Serving lines. That's my favorite topic today. You just mentioned that it's more space expansion. Are we sufficient with serving lines? Since that's a big topic at the elementary schools.
We are, the good news about that is that we are currently not using one of our serving lines. And part of it is because, as we talked about, a lot of students, are not, they're avoiding the lunch, the lunch area, and or not participating or taking the classes. So, so the students aren't currently using that serving line. If we were to, implement a schedule where every student had lunch, we would have an additional serving line to, to take into that capacity.
Okay, so I'm gonna continue on the theme. We have been, and to the credit of the Board of Ed and many other advocates in town, improving our nutritional offerings across the board, beginning with focusing more, and correct me if I'm wrong, Board of Ed members who are in the back, at the elementary level, and then moving up. So over time, again, this is looking into the future. We're hopeful that we will continue to do that throughout. And salad bar, I'm going to use anecdotal, so forgive me, this is not a data point that I have evidence on, but I don't know if a salad bar is offered regularly or not. Again, would there be space for something like that?
We started the year with a salad bar.
Okay.
We are not currently running a salad bar in one of the serving lines.
Okay.
It was not an option that the students were choosing, and so they moved away from that. But there are still healthy options that are available to students. The high schools have not been left out of those discussions at the town level, but so.
Right, and my comments are based on what I heard from a presentation at the Board of Ed meeting, that, and understandably so, that habits form at young ages and we work on those going forward. So, but the answer to my question is that is an option, given the space and what will be done, that is an option in the future, and that there is space for that. Okay.
I think you were referring to, we had hired a food service consultant, a chef,
Yes.
to actually do some work in our schools, to work with the cooks and to work direct
Yes,
with students
thank
and
you.
that sort of thing. And that was more concentrated at the elementary
Yes.
level. But all the schools are under the healthy food guidelines and the
Thank
new
you.
USDA requirements.
Thank you for clarifying.
And I'm getting really hungry having this
Yes.
conversation.
I know.
You guys meet through dinner like
Me
this all
too.
the time?
While we're on cafeteria?
Go right ahead.
Wait that out.
Thank you.
Not good for my blood sugar.
Could I
usually bring a power.
You're welcome to bring snacks for the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
At future
I
meetings.
know it is that time, right?
Yeah.
I have a question on construction cost per square foot. For instance, if I use, just roughly, the kitchen, the cafeteria, if it's new construction, you have to add on, the 1,800 square feet that we're going to add on, roughly to 2,000. What is the price per foot we should use for that?
Just for the raw addition? Without, I'm sorry, yes. you're asking schematic design level questions on a conceptual study, so I'm thinking quickly
realize
from the
that.
seat of my pants. For the large span space, the addition, knocking out all those exterior walls, probably $350 a square foot just for the addition.
Okay. And what about for renovated? parts
It
of
it would be the inverse of the number that gets me to the $280 per square foot that I showed.
I can do the math.
That's
but-
how we
so-
calculate it.
So the answer is that $280 per square foot
Is a conjoined number.
is a blended rate,
Yes, it is.
which is roughly some dollar per square foot for 4,800 square feet, and a significantly higher number per square foot for the additional 2,000 of new square feet.
1,500, correct, yes.
As well. We currently have, what, 4,800, we're going to 6,750, so it's
Okay, thank
it's
you.
closer to 2,000.
You're right.
But that's the answer. So
Yes.
that is a blended rate.
Correct.
Okay. On the new classrooms and the new science rooms, where they are new construction numbers only,
Mhm.
they're at $275 and $300 per square respectively, and which is going to be significantly less per square foot than the blended portion, or than the unblended portion up above. I'm just not quite sure how to equate those two.
Well, the classrooms are renovations of existing spaces. They are alterations, those 4 classrooms are alterations of existing spaces, so they are not additions, so they don't deserve the $350 square foot number. The laboratories at 300 are derated because we tuck them into the existing corridor where 2 of their walls are common with the existing school. So they too are not pure or as generous additions as the cafeteria is. That's purely projected out from the face of the building.
Okay.
So we're taking advantage of the economies of location
Good.
and shared materials.
Thank you for that. That helps. Back to the air quality issues that we were talking about before. Do we need to do any HVAC work or significant HVAC work in conjunction with either new space, renovated space, or keeping the PCB clean spaces clean and safe?
Right. Well, air conditioning was something that the Board of Ed considered as part of this. A long discussion about it. One of the board members asked, it was not originally part of the plan. Bill went and costed that out, and that cost was $9 million or something along those lines. And the board had a long discussion about it and didn't include it as part of the project. It was never contemplated as part of the waterfall. Obviously, in the new space, that's different, right? The new space is fully, right?
Yes.
Yeah, fully air-conditioned and
Especially the
so
cafeteria,
forth.
yeah.
Right. But there would be some, and we know there's issues at that school with the heat. And we think there would be some relief, and Bill talked about this, some relief from the new windows with some tinting and shading that would offset some of the greenhouse effect we have right now in that school. So the new windows would benefit. And the board had a discussion about, could you do something with the HVAC and back and forth, and it turns out to be incredibly not cost-effective, but Bill can talk to that. That was considered and not put forward by the board. In an economy move. Right. But I don't know if you want to talk about HVAC.
I guess my question, in addition to that, is the preservation of the air quality. Do we have any issues that this plan does not consider?
No, actually, this plan is mandated because of its state grant status to meet the relatively new high-performance building standards, which are mandated by the legislature or the state. Those have much higher standards than even our current code has. And so we will be designing for more air quality and temperature efficiency, carbon dioxide control, and controls for the buildings. A lot of the systems that we put into Stratfield School are even at more advanced going into this, but we will be utilizing the existing boilers, which have the capacity to serve these small, relatively small additions, things like that.
Right.
But where we can improve comfort and other elements and yet remain within your budget, that's what the schematic, your first step that your architect is going to do, is really study much more thoroughly what can be afforded within the budget and the program that has been stipulated.
Okay, so at this point, with what we know, we're confident that this plan economically covers those air quality thresholds and
Yes.
guidelines that we need to get to.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And my last question is on the windows themselves. We're replacing 85% of the windows. What other options might there have been out there, or what other options are out there if you chose to not do the windows? Do some people seal them? Do some people put storms in? Do you leave PCBs undisturbed? These are just conversations I've, had with a number of people, and I'm just trying to understand, were there any other options that were reasonable, that were considered and, not contemplated?
Generally, yes, there are a lot of technical options, triple
Right.
plane or heat shield glazing systems, much more active tinting, solar shading on the outside to better control your heat gain and heat loss are always part of it, and we will be considering, or your architect should be considering, exterior shading of the building, so you don't have to manipulate shades on the inside.
Yeah.
But your hands are virtually tied by the PCB rules and laws from the EPA Region 1. Once you discover PCBs, you either have to remove them or encapsulate them. You have virtually no choice. So it's once you discover and you know of the presence of the material, you are required to deal
one of
with
those
it.
two things.
Yeah, so even though there are other window options, because we have to pull the frames out,
Then there are no options.
there are no
So
options.
they need to be removed and
Yes.
remediated and replaced.
Correct.
You've answered my question. Thank you.
Anything else? Kristen?
Thank you for mentioning the boilers. I had forgotten about those, and I remembered that they were in the long-range plan.
What
Two
year?
1971 boilers. Now, I know from past conversations that we have had some other ones that are much older.
Right,
than
those
that.
are young in
Those are
Fairfield
young.
terms.
They are young.
Right.
I am wondering how those boilers are functioning, and do we anticipate in a few years that we'll be looking, obviously, if something happens, we know we'll be replacing them as needed, but.
Tom hasn't had a chance at glory yet. This is a good
There
question.
you
Okay,
go.
there you go.
Right, share the stage.
Actually, both high schools have 3 boilers each.
I-
Both high schools are 1971 vintage. Ward High School, we've had 2 emergencies, different years to replace 2. Ludlow High School, we had 1 emergency where we had to replace 1. So right now, Ludlow High School has 2 1971 boilers, and I believe a 2008.
Ward is 1971?
Yeah, I believe
It
those are
was only
71.
built in 56. They replaced them 15 years in?
Yep, I believe so.
Wow.
Sorry, didn't
And then
mean
we
to
had 2
distract.
emergencies there. We've had 2 go down. So there is a plan. We normally put them in a non-recurring capital funding request
Right.
for the boilers. Ludlow High School is a little more expensive because it has to be craned in over the building. It's in the courtyard to get to the boiler room.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I also, I haven't talked about site plan issues and parking, and that's another one of my favorite topics. I was looking, if I was looking at it correctly, it's not anticipated, or is it anticipated that parking spaces will be impacted with the bump out, or it's just coming, it's not? You're nodding.
Correct. It is not impacting a graphic under tab.
You should go closer to the mic.
Oh, I'm
Right.
sorry, yeah.
I-
The graphic under tab 4 shows you the impact and how close it gets to the handicap spaces. Tab 4, I think?
Yes,
The picture?
page 10.
Yeah, I'm sorry, page 11?
Yes, exactly. Right, that's what I recall.
Oh, wow.
So there aren't, so it definitely will not impact parking, site plan remains the same, but I guess the other part of my question is, and we've already gotten a few pieces of correspondence, emails from people, actually on both sides, in support and against this project. And one of the concerns with the project adding capacity is the fact that this is a high-traffic area where we have a lot of car volume, and that allowing for extra students at this site is a concern for traffic and parking issues. And that would be someone who would be arguing, I assume, for redistricting. So I just wondered if you could address that in terms of parking. I know, having been a parent at Roger Ludlow Middle School, that site certainly gets a lot of activity on a parking basis, especially when there are things happening at both schools at once. So can you address that for us? Are we good to go if we do expand here and go forward with this project and go this direction? How are we going to do with parking?
Well, Greg can talk about the parking, but these kids are coming to this school, regardless of whether this school is big enough to handle them or not. So, short of redistricting,
Right.
1,750 kids are going to be coming to that site. And so that really doesn't change, matters at all. I'll tell you, by the time the town ever agreed on a redistricting plan, I'll be long gone from here, and so will a lot of other people. But so I don't see that as a solution at all. I just want to be clear about that. But I'll let Greg talk about the parking situation, traffic right now. I will say that it was a good move on our part to move the start times back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that did help things as much as it cut into the adolescent sleep time, and that saved $500,000 in bus costs. But moving the start time back did help in terms of staggering between the two buildings.
The morning commute, obviously, our main competition is the railroad station, and then in the afternoon, again, for the most part, the exodus, if everyone followed the posted traffic patterns that we share with students and parents,
It's a big if.
if they were to do that, our belief is that the congestion would not be as created. It is what it is, and despite some efforts, we have limited resources in terms of being able to monitor those things, or expend the human resources to put out there to be directing traffic. And we have educators. I'd rather them be meeting with students and helping them there than standing in a parking lot. But at the same time, we will have, we don't currently have enough student parking for the students that are requesting parking. What we do is we'd open it up to seniors first as a privilege, and then after a certain amount of time, we open it up to juniors and seniors who gain their licenses, and usually by January or so, we've expended all the student passes that we have. Then. So it really kind of becomes a first come, first serve endeavor, and so that would remain and still be in effect. So you'd probably have more students, who wouldn't be able to park, at least legally. And so for staff, however, we feel like there is there will be enough overflow in terms of whatever increases we may incur in staff. We feel like there is enough space for both and visitors as well. So that's something that we should be okay on. And again, I'll just go back to, in terms of traffic flow, we send home detailed maps to all families, try to say these are entry points, these are exit points, and if people were to kind of stay with that, they may have to wait a little bit longer, just like they would in downtown Fairfield or anywhere else that's a little more congested. But what gets us in trouble is when people try to have shortcuts. Case in point, if you are traveling, if you're trying to leave, some people want to get to Umpqua Road and not go out Mill Plain, so they will double around the middle school where their buses are staging for their dismissal, and then come back around to the shared driveway, and then you have maybe people who are picking up their students, instead of following the road behind the high school, they'll want to take a left as a shortcut through the Ludlow Middle School parking lot. So you have the traffic coming this way, traffic turning left, and we have students crossing the road who are walkers or going downtown, and so it's dangerous. It can be a dangerous situation. So we try to post people to try to monitor those situations, but we can't be everywhere. So yeah, it's not, I don't think it's something that can be fixed easily, but at the same time, we post patterns that we believe will work, and it's about regulating those. So.
Well, just a follow-up comment, it is structurally may not be, but certainly if the community decides to change its behavior pattern, it is something that can be changed and has been done other places. So I hope that we will continue to do that. I just want to follow up also on what Dr. Teitel said. The students are coming. I think, Dr. Teitel, my comments were with respect to a communication I received, and the question is, and clearly the recommendation from the board at this point and the administration is that we go forward with this project, that we expand the capacity at Ludlow. But if the town bodies made a choice to not fund this for some reason, then we're going to have to look at that in another way. But I think what I hear you saying, Dr. Teitel, that you're very clear that redistricting is not something that you think that we, or the Board of Education specifically, since that is in their purview, would be able to come to an agreement about in a timely fashion that would address this issue as it
And
stands.
all you do is move the problem to the other school. So where do you're going to spend the money somewhere, since both schools are at or above capacity. So this is an economical place, it seems to me. You do it in one place, deal with it, it's less disruptive, it's doable. So it's not like, if we had a school somewhere, a hypothetical school with 150 empty seats, then, I think we'd be much more serious about biting the bullet on some difficult decisions. But when you have the other school, which is crowded and enrollment will be going up, it doesn't make any sense. All you're going to do is move the problem across town.
Mm-hmm. And I recognize redistricting always kind of raises all of our emotion levels because tends to be a very emotional topic. I bring it up with respect to the site plan because that's the one place, just when I'm thinking about this, that I understand. Ward offers a very different site option, just not the building itself, but the site.
Right.
And when I think about that, it is something, I mean, you've heard, this isn't something
Right.
new you've heard
No,
from
I
me.
understand.
You know, I always bring this up, so I
So I know where you're coming from.
that
Yeah.
it's a question that I have to ask and
Right.
something that I weigh in looking at this because it is, you're right, the railroad station, 2 other schools, and downtown. So it does pose a question that I think is worth discussing. So thank you for having that discussion. That's it for me with that for now.
Mr. Kiley?
I'm good.
Any comments from the public on this topic, and comments only?
Just moving away.
Come on up. Yes, please come up to the podium. And if you'd be kind enough to give your name and address so the viewers at home will know who's speaking.
Betty Ann O'Shaughnessy, Queens Grant Road. I didn't organize all of my questions, but I do have a lot of concerns. And I am very worried about this site. And I think what you were saying about Ward handled 1,800 students very well. I've talked with prior administrators on the site when there were that many students there. 2,200 was not good, but 1,800 was. And the Ludlow site, we're setting ourselves up for a disaster to have that many students. When you were in school, let's say, there was no middle school on the site. And that has an enormous impact. Where are we going to put all the buses for all those students? We know that Ward handled that before. Ward's hallways are larger. Ward's auditorium is larger. Their gymnasium is larger. I hear that, well, we're just moving the problem over there. Well, their capacity is 1,400, but there are more classrooms, and that is the Early Childhood Center, which does not belong in a high school. It would be better to find another space for that and return the high school to the high school. That is high school space. We need the high school space. And as a taxpayer, I do believe that we need to educate younger children. But as a taxpayer, we have an obligation to those students, kindergarten through senior, to take care of them first. And we do have other possible space for the ECC. I think it's an important program, but I don't think it belongs in the high school. And what I would propose is to redistrict so that you make Ward the school with 1,800 students and Ludlow the school with 1,550 students. So you flip it. And it would be, I think, it'd be better to spend the money at Ward. And I realize redistricting is a very difficult emotional issue. The board would not address the high school issue. We knew this was going to be a problem. They would not address it when they did redistricting. Majority of the board would not address it. And that was a mistake. And here we are. I just think you're setting, I have a lot of questions about it, but I also have a question about the process, and that is why is the administration of the education system spending money getting architects when that's really a town function? And why isn't the town doing a feasibility study where you look at all options? Not the back of an envelope type of analysis, but a real analysis of where is the best space. And that's all I'll say for now, but I will send you more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brand?
Yeah, hello, guys. And I know it's late, so I'll try and talk fast.
For the folks at home, if you kindly...
Sue Brand, Board of Education member. Just a point of information, because you folks were discussing the high school schedule. And I, like a lot of other board members, value the lunchtime for a myriad of reasons, not the least of which is certainly nutrition. However, there was a committee, they did review the high school schedules, they did have some recommendations, and the board several years ago, and I think it came out around 2008, did have a great discussion about that. And at the time, the estimate was, at a minimum, that it would cost an additional $2 million. So as painful as it was, they decided not to do it, and the reason was the cost, that moving forward they were afraid it was not going to be sustainable. So as a matter of information, I wanted you to be aware that it was considered in the past, and it was seen as being quite an expensive shift. Although, again, you know, would I like to see it? Yeah, I would. But it was cost prohibitive. Thanks.
Hi, Jessica Gerber, Board of Education member. I did just want to say that the majority of the board did approve having this move forward to the other town bodies. Obviously, it's a very complex issue. We understand the cost, although of course you do have to consider the cost of the roofs and the windows, which will happen no matter what the enrollment at Ludlow is. I think that if we talk about getting moving the ECC, there are costs associated with that as well. And finding a space and whatnot. And I think that the redistricting, take out the emotional aspect of it, I think it's simply a matter of trying to find the best way to do it. And I'm not sure with the numbers, what they are, how viable an option that is. And I will say also with the high school schedule, I was not on the board at the time that they chose not to move forward with that. I know that there was a tremendous amount of cost involved, but I think that the majority of board members would like to at least re-examine it. I'm not to say that it would end up moving forward again, but I think we all understand that the smaller number of instructional time is an issue that parents and teachers and administrators all have issue with. And I know when I ran for Board of Ed, I did say that was something that I wanted to look into, and I know other people who ran the same time I did said that as well. So again, we might not go forward in that direction, but I think you always have to kind of keep that in the back of our mind to try to at least look at it, because it is something that's very important for the education of all of our high school students, no matter where they attend school. So, thank you.
Mr. Gerber, thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment? Thank you. Back to the board. Any further discussion at the board or further comments?
I'm good for now.
All right, given kind of where we are and given the amount of information that we've absorbed, and I think there have been some requests for information beyond that, should we entertain postponing this to our next meeting so we have a chance to both consider this and get the additional information?
Yeah, I will say that's part of my questions earlier with respect to timing, because I'm sensitive to timing. But I know that certainly, given the amount of time I've spent looking at information for other projects in the past and most recent past, Riverfield, I would appreciate some additional time to put together all the information that we have received today. I actually have not taken the opportunity to tour the building, which I think would help for myself at least.
Just to clarify, not to interrupt too much, but is that a formal request you want to make to have a
I would
time for the
love to
Board of
make a
Selectmen
formal
to-
request, if I may.
Be great.
Is that something that, Mr. Cullen, can we make that of you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
We can have lunch with you.
So, and also, I think, thinking about timing, given it's a June 30th deadline, so though I know it's not a lot of wiggle room there, at least there is some availability, so I would prefer to wait until our next meeting.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a Riverfield. When is that scheduled to come back before us? Do we know yet?
May 15th, next meeting.
Right, so do we want to tackle 2 items like this at one meeting?
Well, realistically, if I
I'm
may-
just throwing it out there because I thought that was what the schedule was.
Yeah. And
It's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Let's.
it will be for the RTM as well, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's, right,
All right.
yeah.
Let's do two. Let's.
Certainly
I think
postponing this
it-
makes sense. I mean, I'm not opposed to that.
Do you have a suggestion beyond our next meeting?
Well,
Because it's basically the way the schedule lines out.
mhm.
We can postpone it to the 15th, our next meeting. That would get it on the Board of Selectmen meeting for June, and then the RTM,
Board of Finance.
for Board of Finance, sorry, for June, and potentially the RTM for
The end of
the
June.
end of June, if things progress through that. I mean, at any point, it could get bumped, and that could not happen.
Correct.
Second, that assumes we stay to our normally scheduled meetings and don't schedule a special meeting, which we'd have the flexibility to do for the Board of Finance meeting, excuse me,
Could do that.
which would still get it on their agenda. Either way, if the RTM doesn't take this up in May, that would mean potentially both these are on their calendar for June. That's making a bunch of assumptions about how the projects progress through the boards.
Mhm. Right.
But I think that's from a scheduling standpoint, the worst case. From a practical standpoint, there's a lot of discussion we have to go forward.
When's the next Board of Finance meeting?
Well, the next one is
May.
Wednesday.
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, right?
Wednesday.
Yeah. And that's their May regular meeting, the first Tuesday of the
Right.
month, right?
And Monday is the RTM meeting. Tuesday, in essence, is our allowance for a second night of RTM discussion because they're having public comment on
Right.
Monday night, and based on what proposals for adjustments there are, if there's public comment for each adjustment, getting done in one night might be a challenge.
Right, and then Wednesday's Board of Finance meeting and mill rate.
Correct.
Right, okay, all right. So these aren't going to get on that meeting. There's no way that this gets on that meeting anyway.
If we took action today, it's possible.
Oh, yeah, right,
If we
right.
don't take action today, there's not time to schedule a special meeting between now and then given the other things on our agendas.
Right. So they only have, assuming that that all happens, and assuming everything else falls into place, they only have one more meeting the first Tuesday of June for potentially both of these projects.
Correct.
Okay, fine.
In which case, they'd go to the RTM at the end of June, and the RTM would only have one meeting. So to the extent that they can be handled and questions dealt with effectively, then they potentially could meet that with, if there's additional information or longer discussion that's needed, then they're not hitting the June 30th deadline.
I got it, thanks.
What I'd suggest, given where we are today, is that we postpone this to a date certain being our next meeting. With your permission, we'll take a look at the follow-up, and that would also give us time perhaps to have some follow-up discussions with Dr. Title about scheduling and see where that leaves us, and then we can address that as we take this up. But that would tentatively leave us with a plan to discuss both projects at our next May meeting.
Good enough.
All right, can I have a motion to postpone to a date certain being the next meeting?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any further discussion on that topic of postponement?
Yes, I think that we should immediately alert the RTM leadership to the potential that you set forth in your comments, knowing that there are a lot of things that can happen, and the Board of Finance as well. So, because it's a lot. But it's also, it's where we are, and it's what we're needing to address right now. So I am in support of the postponement.
I think that what's obvious from what we've gone through, and we've talked almost, I think, at least 2 hours, if not 2.5 hours on this topic alone, this is a lot of information to absorb all at one time. Dr. Title, just for future reference, I think, and you and I talked earlier, so I think in looking at future projects like this, I think to be fair to the Board of Selectmen, we should probably plan for kind of having a couple of Board of Selectmen meeting opportunities. Just give us a chance to have a presentation once, some consideration time, and then a vote at a second meeting. And I know we just sat down, we just talked, we looked at the schedule. I know I didn't bring that up ahead of time, so I don't mean to put that on you by any means. But I think that's one of the lessons that we're taking from Riverfield and from this one, that especially in projects this size, that would be helpful. All right, any further discussion here? No. Any comments from the public on the postponement and the postponement only? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote? Oh.
One other thing, if we could, before we leave today, perhaps look at some dates and times, if that's possible. I don't know if that's doable, but we may need to do that via email, I recognize. I don't know if Mr. Cullen's going to be here, so, yes.
Can you all come in one car? So we don't take up 3
Carpooling's great.
I think I'm within walking distance.
Yeah.
All right.
Fine.
Okay. Are we ready to vote?
We Yes. are.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Jen, if you'll please obviously note that, and we'll take that up. I do want to thank the members of the administration and my alma mater's principal, Greg, thank you, and the architect for coming here and giving us this detailed presentation. And we covered a wide range of topics. I realize that puts a lot of stress on all of you to answer a whole lot of questions in a bunch of areas. And I do thank you for your patience in stepping us through all this, including some back-in-the-day questions as we go through.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Next up is to review, modify, and approve the Fairfield Ludlow High School Windows Building Committee charge, originally approved back in May 6, 2012. I'm going to suggest we postpone that to our next meeting when we have a better understanding of the project and what we need to do then. So I would entertain a motion to postpone to a date certain being the next meeting.
So moved.
A second? I'll second. Any discussion?
Yes. Given that we may be looking at both of those projects then, which may be extensive, I think it's worth discussing today, just because I think we have enough of a sense of the project. I don't know that it needs a lot of work. Just you each may have different opinions, but I think it's worth looking at. I know it's late now, but I'm up for it.
And Dr. Title?
Yes.
If I could kind of follow up with a point. At what point do we technically need the charge to move the project forward? I know traditionally how we do things, but forgetting that.
The charge is an internal issue for you to decide when you want to do that. That has nothing at all to do with the state reimbursement process. In fact, charges aren't even required under the state reimbursement process. So what you need to get done is the bond resolution, and the RTM has to pass those 3 resolutions, one of which is to establish a building committee. But you don't need names for the building committee at that moment in time, and you don't need a charge. So you have a little more time on your hands for that if you so desire. It would not affect the reimbursement process or timeline.
So potentially, for now, we could postpone it to the next meeting, but we could literally postpone it to some time thereafter.
Absolutely.
At this board's discretion.
Yeah, you could do that in
based
June.
on how we do.
Right, you really need to get it done before you actually impanel your building committee. It's just a question of whether do the other town bodies want to see it as part of their approval. That I can't tell you. That's all.
All right, and it just seems to me that I would be more comfortable if we defined the project a little bit better. And again, I want to compliment Dr. Title, as we said earlier, in terms of being willing to look at a different process and how we do this. But I think we have an opportunity to literally understand the project in much more detail, then define the charge to make sure it fits within the requirements that this board wants. Because in essence, the charge is only approved by this board. It's not approved by the RTM. It's historically how we've defined the job description for the building committee before the resolution was done. Now we have the resolution done that define the project in a lot more detail. The charges really are instructions to the building committee in addition to that, and perhaps clarifying some things like technology expenditures, what we expect for bonding, or don't want to see in bonding as part of that.
Okay.
Good.
I'm good.
All right. Any further discussion here?
No.
Any comment? We already came back to the board on it. Did we have public comment on the postponement resolution? All right. Any public comment on the postponement resolution? And the postponement resolution only, please. Seeing none, back to the board. Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor? Aye. All right. That's postponed. And Dr. Title, thank you for your help on that. Next up, Superintendent of Schools to hear an update on school field trip policies. Yep. Just by way of background, there was recently a news article where there was a school in another part of the state. There's a field trip to a foreign country. One of the students came back with an illness, and there was a, if memory serves, a $20 million suit against the school in question. Upon seeing that, and I believe I sent that out to both of you on the board, it seemed appropriate that we get an update from the school system as to what we're doing from a risk management standpoint to prevent that type of occurrence from happening in the Fairfield school system. So with that as an intro, Dr. Title, one, thank you for, we just talked about this last week, thank you for coming forward so quickly with this.
Mrs. Parks is here, Deputy Superintendent. Her job is field trip approval, among 45 other things. And this has been a topic of discussion that we actually originated back when we had a conversation about risk management with respect to workers' compensation. Looking at what were the causes of some of the workers' compensation, we discovered that there were at least one case we were aware of where there was an employee who was hurt on a field trip and was at a field trip we really needed to take. And so that got us looking at the whole field trip issue. And so I'll let Mrs. Parks talk about the steps we've taken. I will say in general, field trips we take, particularly overseas, as I've seen them and heard the reports from the teachers and the students, is they're incredibly valuable when they're done well. They have tremendous educational value. We have staff going way above and beyond. The reports from the students are glowing. And we really want to try to maintain all those benefits, but at the same time manage the risks.
So, some of the things that we have done over the past year to try to manage some of the risks without really inhibiting the learning that goes forward from some of the trips. I've really tried to enforce a strong curriculum connection for the trips, which is the first thing, and that's according to policy. They should be in alignment with our educational experiences and our curriculum. So there are some that I have denied based on that. Regarding the foreign field trips, we met with the risk management company. They indicated there was an insurance that they would recommend that all students purchase before going on the trips. We require that. We had required that before we even investigated it. We have, Dr. Title and I have talked about time out of school, so we are really limiting, and it was difficult with the schedule this year, but we're asking that students and teachers not be out of school, miss school days more than 2 school days, which has really drawn in the scope of the trips that are being requested. I started a committee this year of teachers and administrators who have been working all year, and within the next couple of weeks they should be giving me a packet of information. One of the things that I became aware of is that I'm not sure that we took a couple of steps that I think we should take. Many of our foreign trips are arranged through travel agencies, but I don't know that we have been doing a really thorough orientation for parents and students in regard to, we do a lot with the culture and the rules and the regulations on the trip, but actually in with culture, what are some of the dangers? What are, have the staff really investigated the different cultures? Are there expectations that are different? I've asked that one step that be taken for any staff member who wants to go on a foreign trip. They need to go to the State Department website and determine if there's any cautions in those countries that we should be looking at before we arrange trips. So we're doing a lot more. That committee is finishing their work. It'll probably prompt a bit of a change in our regulations that go along with the policy in terms of what are the requirements when you're going to take kids on trips. And even within our own non-foreign trips, I think we're trying to rein in how many days of school are missed, how much it aligns with the curriculum. We do require, if you remember, there was a bus issue, I think the year before I came here. We now require, any bus requests have to go through our own Department of Transportation, because Mr. Fickey contacts all the private charters to make sure they have the appropriate insurance, that they have the appropriate licensing. So that's a change. Teachers are not to go find their own charter buses. So, and we're really trying to emphasize that, a field trip, there's a lot of benefits to field trips, but there are also a lot of safety issues. We're looking at some organizations that, some field trips that would be better run as a private organization. And for example, the ski trips, we no longer allow the ski trips. They weren't really tightly connected to the curriculum or to clubs in the school. So we said, if someone wants to take a group of kids on a ski trip, they can do it through another organization. The same is true with Ludlow Corps. They've started their own organization now to take kids on trips. So it's been somewhat controversial, but I really do think that I think Fairfield's been really, really lucky with all the places that kids have traveled and not had a negative experience. So we're just trying to not in any way limit the trips, but to make sure all the precautions have been taken, and maybe in some circumstances limit the trips depending on where they want to go. So it's I think it's a different world today, and we just have to be a lot more cautious about where we take students. So, and, you know, the training of the chaperones and the students before they go on the trip, I think, is a big part of it. Mhm.
Any questions? Go ahead.
I have no questions, I just have comments, and I want to thank you for the update. Having just served as a chaperone for 4 days with the Ward High School musicians, I just want to say what an excellent job the teachers, and I'm going to name them, that's why I was looking, I was forgetting Katie's last name, but Katie Carlson, Scott Marsland, and Lauren Harmata, and Vicki Kwan also. They did a phenomenal job preparing all of the parents and the students. The students did a great job, and I heard that the Ludlow group as well. So I think it's really helpful having those data points, those kind of checklists, and I also think that it is important, just from my standpoint, there's always risk. There's risk every day for kids on the school bus, at school, on field trips, but yet the field trips, I think, do provide a very valuable experience and educational component, not just the one that I went on, but many of the others. The kindergartners who go to the Discovery Museum and the fourth graders who go over there, all kinds of things. So I appreciate that you are keeping us in the loop about it, and also support you in continuing those connections to the curriculum and enhancements. So thank you.
Mr. Conley?
No, thank you for the update, and I look forward to the committee's findings, reports, and recommendations. Thank you.
Just a couple questions. One is, does this, you know, we talked about field trips, and that was kind of the focal point because of the article that popped up and the size of the suit that came through. But Kristen mentioned music. Does this apply to sporting teams and trips they might take, be it tournament, postseason play, that type of thing? How do you?
Well, season play really isn't a field trip.
Yeah.
Right, but however, the issue is, since we're not here to judge the curriculum or to
Right.
second guess whether it matches,
Right.
we're really here to look for reasonableness in terms of managing the risk part of this.
Right.
So a sports team taking a trip would be the same as a class taking a trip in terms of risk management, in terms of the kids, their well-being,
Yes.
the coaches/teachers that are accompanying them, because anything that happened might have a financial impact on the town and our policy. So my question is, how broadly is this portrayed? Does it apply to the music groups, the sports teams, any other group that might travel with respect or sponsored by the school system? And how do we manage those?
Well, I think we don't generally classify for kids traveling to a sports competition as a field trip. I think in general the coaches are much more used to taking kids out of the school environment to participate in an athletic event, and they have set rules, and all of their buses are organized through our transportation department. So I haven't seen that as an issue, but
You mentioned that, in fact, we have some insurance policies we require for certain. Do we have insurance policies that we require for any sporting teams? as part
those
of that?
insurance policies were just for overseas travel. It's a special insurance provided by a company that Kerma recommended to us.
Okay.
But, you know,
So if there were a trip to Florida or California, that wouldn't generate a need for any additional insurance?
correct.
That would be highly unusual for our sports teams.
Right.
I mean, virtually all the travel is within the state.
Have we looked at other schools, either taken recommendations from our KERMA or PMA, our workers' comp folks? Have we looked at other schools to see what policies or procedures they might have in place to see what we can learn from best practices?
We haven't done that, but when we did, Kerma did meet with us and looked at the trips we take, and the only real advice they gave to us was to make sure that when we do the foreign trips that we make the students purchase the insurance. And they felt that we were fine with other things. I was a little more concerned, I think, than they were actually when I started looking at some of the trips.
Okay. Just again, looking at both the changing world and needless to say, the security aspects of some of that, even though it's within this country in terms of what we take, how we do it, our policies in that regard.
You know, as soon as you think you have this down, then something like Boston happens.
Right.
And it gets you rethinking everything all over again, or that suit. So I think it's something we have to look at constantly. And, you know, we do rely on, you know, KERMA or PMA for, you know, knowing what the best practices are out there, and that's kind of what they know. They know what's going on in the whole state, and if they see what we're doing is too far afield from that, then we're hoping they'll rein us in. But we're also constantly updating policy and regulations, so this is not the end of it.
Okay. Okay, just from a personal standpoint, something I'm a little sensitive to, at being a scuba diver and kind of traveling to off the beaten path more often than not.
And we don't have a scuba diving club, so
Right.
I'm very grateful.
Although if you were willing to be a volunteer coach, I'm sure we would have 20 kids interested.
Exactly.
From a curriculum standpoint, I'm disappointed. From a risk management standpoint, I'm thrilled.
Maybe we should add a pool to the Ludlow project.
Oh.
Right.
That's been tried.
I'm sure it has.
I don't see it on the I don't see it on the list of things thou shalt not build, so it might be included already. But no, so thank you for that, and if you could kind of, as things happen, I appreciate the update, and I appreciate the timeliness of the update too. And just kind of as a collateral comment, I was talking with Mr. Mayor as Chief Fiscal Officer and reviewing the workers' comp projections, and one of his comments last night at the Board of Finance quarterly review is that our workers' comp experience is trending on a positive note. Now, it's still too new to be sure, but I know that we set up safety committees, we set up additional training, and both on the town and Board of Ed side, so I want to say thank you for your help in working at that. And hopefully, if we keep that trend going, that'll speak very good things for the budget a year from now.
We'll do our best.
So unless there's any further comments from the board?
Good.
No.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and thank you
you.
for staying this late for the presentation.
Yes.
All right. May I have a motion to accept the tax collector refunds?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Hear and consider and act on any communications. There are none. To hear, consider, and act upon any other business. There's none that I'm aware of.
I was just going to comment, maybe we should consider ordering dinner for the next meeting.
I'm in favor of that. We just opened up a new pizza restaurant, Testo's, over on Brooklawn Avenue.
Oh, yeah?
And the food is excellent. So
Where
it's
is it
another
located?
favorite.
Is it?
If you know Brooklawn Avenue, there's a part that goes up and then kind of cuts away about Capitol Avenue.
Yeah,
But
sure.
if you keep going up, it's also, there's a discontinued part, there's a gap in
Okay.
Brooklyn Avenue.
It's right there.
So it's on the other side, so it's literally on the Bridgeport line on that slanted part that goes up.
Sure, sure.
Brand-new restaurant comes with my highest recommendations.
Fantastic. That's great news.
You're welcome to. You're welcome to. That's an unpaid sponsorship. That's just
It's a plug.
only paid in the sense that they are a new taxpayer in town, and we're thrilled to have them. All right. With all that said, if there, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.